The news channel. Hostage. Israel. Government. Business merger. Refugee. Oil supply. Defense. The Klan. Education. Strikes. Crime. Riot. Candidates. Abscam. Iran. Iraq. Religion. Science. Celebrity. The Earth. The Universe. The news channel.
Good day, I'm Bob Kane.
And I'm Jim Wilkerson. It's 2 o'clock in the East, and this is the news channel.
At this hour, President Reagan is scheduled to speak before the Legislative Conference of the AFL-CIO Building and Construction Trades Department. For live coverage of the President's remarks, let's switch to our bureau in Washington and correspondent Bernard Shaw.
Bob, as you say, President Reagan is going before a group generally opposed to his budget-cutting plans, the Building Trades Council of the AFL-CIO. This is the ballroom, and all of the executives are on the dais applauding the President's entry a few moments ago in the Washington Hilton in Washington. Mr. Reagan, as we saw him pop up and sit back down, is right to the left of the podium. From this distance, I think that's the presidential seal on the dais, and he'll be getting up in just a moment. In the weeks following the announcement of his economic package, the president, as you know, has given several speeches trying to justify and explain his plan to reduce federal spending and cut taxes. Today, he'll try to ease the worries of big labor by stressing the work ethic and his pledge to trim the role of the federal government. This morning, Labor Secretary Ray Donovan got a warm welcome from this group of union members. According to Mr. Donovan, President Reagan deserves his time at bat, and Building Trades Department head Robert Georgine pledged to give Mr. Reagan that fair chance. We have a copy of the President's speech, and we will let him make that speech rather than tell you about excerpts from it, but we'll be following it and making parenthetical notes and margin notes should he change the wording or the thrust of any of these paragraphs. Literally, the President has gone into labor's den to defend his proposals, to justify them, and seek the support of this group. Some of the members of this group on this dais here already are on record opposing them. So the President knows he has his work cut out.
His first few months in office, we wish him the best of luck in coping with these difficult problems. And we offer him our hand to assist in whatever way possible. On behalf of the Building Construction Trades Department, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Wilson Reagan. Mr. President.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mr. President, Reverend clergy, gentlemen here in the dais, and you ladies and gentlemen, there's been a lot of talk in the last several weeks here in Washington about communication, the need to communicate. And I have a story that I haven't told for a long time, but somehow it's been brought back to me since I've been here, about communication and some of the basic rules of communication. It was told to me the first time by Danny Villanueva, who used to place kick for the Los Angeles Rams, and then later became a sports announcer. And Danny told me that one night, as a sports announcer, he was having a young ball player with the Los Angeles Dodgers over to the house for dinner, and the young wife was bustling about getting the dinner ready while he and the ball player were talking sports, and the baby started to cry. And over her shoulder, the wife said to her husband, "Change the baby." And this young ball player was embarrassed in front of Danny, and he said to his wife, "What do you mean, change the baby? I'm a ball player. That's not my line of work." And she turned around, put her hands on her hips, and she communicated. She said, "Look, Buster, you lay the diaper out like a diamond, you put second base on home plate, put the baby's bottom on the pitcher's mound, hook up first and third, slide home underneath, and if it starts to rain, the game ain't called, you start all over again." So I'm going to try to communicate a little bit today. I'm pleased to take part in this national conference of the Building and Construction Trades Department of the AFL-CIO. And I hope you will forgive me if I point with some pride to the fact that I'm the first president of the United States to hold a lifetime membership in an AFL-CIO union. And Mr. President, I'm very grateful for your words about cooperation. Now, if I can only persuade certain individuals up on the Hill to do the same thing, we won't have any trouble at all. But members of your organization have played and do play a great part in the building of America. They also are an important part of the industry in which my union plays a part. Now, it's true that grease paint and make-believe are not tools of your members' trade, but we all know the meaning of work, of family, and of country. For 2 decades or more, I participated in renegotiating our basic contract when it came renewal time. And here, too, we have much in common. Sitting at the negotiating table, we were guided by 3 principles in our demands. Is it good for our people? Is it fair to the other fella and to the customer? And is it good for the industry? Samuel Gompers, who founded the American Federation of Labor and who literally gave his life to that cause, said, "Doing for people what they can and ought to do for themselves is a dangerous experiment. In the last analysis, the welfare of the workers depends upon their own initiative. Whatever is done under the guise of philanthropy or social morality, which in any way lessens initiative, is the greatest crime that can be committed against the toilers. Let social busybodies and professional public morals experts in their fads reflect upon the perils they rashly invite under the pretense of social welfare." Samuel Gompers was repudiating the socialist philosophy when he made that statement. No one worked harder to get or believed more in a fair shake for the people whose sweat is the fuel of our country. But he didn't believe that this should or could come from government compulsion. America depends on the work of labor, and the economy we build should reward and encourage that labor as our hope for the future. We've strayed far from the path that was charted by this man who believed so much in the freedom and dignity of the worker. We are in today's economic mess precisely because our leaders have forgotten that we built this great nation on rewarding the work ethic instead of punishing it. We've gone astray from first principles. We've lost sight of the rule that individual freedom and ingenuity are at the very core of everything that we've accomplished. Government's first duty is to protect the people, not run their lives. What have been some of the results of this straying from basic principles? Well, for one, violent crime has surged 10%, making neighborhood streets unsafe and families fearful in their homes. We've been left with a legacy of almost 8 million people out of work, 666,000 of them construction workers. All of these people have been robbed of a basic human dignity and forced into the humiliation of unemployment. The annual inflation rate has soared to nearly 12%, making a mockery of hard work and savings. And our national debt has grown to more than $950 billion, despite taxes that eat up an ever-increasing share of the family dollar. This deficit has particular meaning for you because when government has to borrow to pay its bills, it competes for private capital, driving interest rates up and construction starts down. So when people ask me why we have to cut down the budget deficit, I think the answer is pretty clear. If we don't get control of the budget and stop wild and irresponsible spending, we will repeat past intolerable prime interest rates of more than 20%, rates which have played havoc with the lives of your fellow workers. And when we do not have economic security at home, our national security is threatened. We've let our defense spending fall behind, and our capability to defend ourselves against foreign aggressors is not what it should be. These trends not only must stop, believe me, they will be stopped. Every American, and especially all the working people of our country, have an enormous stake in what we do. You pay the most taxes. You believe in the work ethic, but subsidize a government that does not. You who have traditionally saved to provide for your futures today cannot save. You who most want to work are most likely to be laid off. You, through taxes on your hard-earned wages, pay for what could be as much as $25 billion each year in federal waste, abuse, and outright fraud in government programs. Franklin Delano Roosevelt spoke of the forgotten man at the bottom of the economic pyramid. Well, today it's safe to say that the people at both ends of the pyramid are getting attention. The man who's forgotten is the fellow who built it. Such a man wrote his congressman a few weeks back, and that letter landed on my desk. I've gotten tens of thousands of letters about our plan for economic recovery. I appreciate all of them, but a few of them really stand out, and this man's letter is one of them. He's an unemployed factory worker from Illinois, the Peoria area, but he worked in construction for 10 years before that. His income right now is totally dependent on unemployment and supplemental benefits from the company he worked for. He and his wife have only been married 3 months, but she's been laid off too. He wrote to say that if spending cuts in government affect his benefits, it'll be hard for his family, but they'll make it. And shades of Sam Gompers, he ended his letter saying that when the opponents of our economic plan start lobbying against it, and let me quote, he said, let them know that there is someone out here who's seen what they can do and is willing to stake his future on trying a different approach. That man has faith in America and faith in what the American people can do if the government will only let them do it. And that man, like most of America, wants a change. Right now, we have the highest peacetime deficit in living memory. Federal personal taxes for the average American family have gone up 58% in the last 5 years. And regulations by the government cost consumers an estimated $100 billion a year. The man in Peoria is right. Across this country, there are millions of people like him yearning for a different approach. They're yearning for us to reach for our hopes and make room for our dreams. And to put it bluntly, they want something different for a change. Instead of halfway solutions, jerry-built programs tied together with red tape, they're ready for an overhaul to make the engine work again. I've heard the complaints coming often from those who had a hand in creating our present situation. They demand proof in advance that what we've proposed will work. Well, the answer to that is we're living with the proof that what they want to continue doing hasn't worked and won't work. I believe what we proposed will work simply because it always has. We must get control of the budget monster, get control of our economy, and I assure you, get control of our own lives and our own destinies. What has been submitted to the Congress is a 4-point comprehensive program or package for economic recovery. If only part of the package is passed by Congress, we'll only ease some of our problems, and that isn't a solution at all. We must first get government spending under control. And let me make something plain. We're not asking that government spend less than it has been spending, although that might not be the worst idea in the world. We're simply proposing that government increase its spending in 1982 over 1981 by 6.1%, not 14%, as was presently or has been advocated. If we keep spending at the present rate of increase, our budget will double again in 6 years. Now, I propose cutting $48.6 billion from the federal budget in fiscal year 82. Now, it's true these are the largest spending cuts ever proposed. But even with these cuts, the budget will still increase by $40 billion next year, and there will probably be a $45 billion deficit. Without our cuts, that deficit will be more than $90 billion. The second point is a 10% across-the-board tax rate cut every year for the next 3 years. This is the most sweeping tax incentive program in the last 20 years, the largest tax rate cuts ever proposed. And again, we're not asking government to get along on less money than it's been accustomed to. Our largest in history tax cut will only reduce the largest in history tax increase that was imposed on all of us at the beginning of this year. Now, I have a feeling that in all the arguing and rhetoric, many Americans have lost sight of the fact that they're not facing taxes as usual, but a gigantic tax increase that will take $770 billion extra out of our pockets over the next 6 years. We think that's too much. This government, without taking a single vote in Congress, has raised billions of dollars from taxpayers in the last few years just through inflation. The system keeps kicking people up into higher brackets as they try to keep up with the cost of living increase, bleeding their earnings, sapping their incentive, and quite frankly, making a mockery out of the tax system. Not too long ago, only 3% of the people who work and earn in this country were in a 30% tax bracket. Today, 33% are in that bracket, and they have no more purchasing power now than they had before when they were in a much lower bracket. There are just too many people in this town who thinks this money belongs to the government. Well, it doesn't. It's your money. It's your sons and daughters' money that they're hoping to use for a new home. It's your parents' money that they need for a decent retirement. And if we do nothing else in this administration, we're going to convince this city that the power, the money, and the responsibility in this country begins and ends with the people and not with some cinder block building in Washington, D.C. The third measure we've called for is elimination of excessive regulation. Now, I know you have no experience with regulation. Over-regulation affects every industry. But many of you know people who are out of work because of the way it affects yours. It's estimated that total regulations have added as much as 20% to the cost of a home. Indeed, I've seen the figure more recently put at 22% is the cost. I've told before, I have a neighbor out in my neighborhood in California who was building his own home, and he got so fed up with all the paperwork and the regulations required that he pasted them all together into one strip of paper, put up 2 poles in front of the half-finished house, and strung them up across there. The strip of paper was 250 feet long. And finally, we're determined to work with the Federal Reserve Board to develop a monetary policy consistent with the economic program designed to stabilize the money supply, reduce inflation, and allow interest rates to come down. People who hold down jobs in the building trades probably understand better than anyone. Well, that is better than anyone except someone who's just lost his job in the building trade. The need for a stable monetary policy. Fewer than 1 in 11 American families can afford to buy a new home. Housing starts are down by 36% from what they were in 1978. Mortgage rates for this year are average 13.5%. Although I'm told in some parts of the country they're currently running in excess of 15%. The main source of strength in this fight is going to be the people themselves. The idea is to unleash the American worker, encourage the American investor, and let each of us produce more to make a better life for all. After all, why should we pay for some luxuries that are not truly essential to our well-being, pay by way of a subsidy when the man and his wife in Peoria are out of work? Why should we subsidize increased production of some things that we already have in surplus? And why should we go in debt to pay for school lunches for children of upper income families when borrowing by government may cost you your job? We not only shouldn't do those things, we no longer can afford to do them. We'll continue to fulfill our obligations to those who must depend on the rest of us. Those who are deserving can rest assured that they'll not be cut adrift. But the rest of us will feel the impact of the budget cuts which have been distributed through the economy as evenly as possible. There is one area, however, where we must spend more, and that is for our national defense. And don't get me wrong, Cap Weinberger, Secretary of Defense, has shown me programs in his department where we can and will realize substantial savings. We'll cut $2.9 billion in next year's budget alone, and the cuts will accumulate to more than $28 billion by 1986 in the Defense Department. But those savings will be applied to the necessary things we must do, thus reducing the amount of additional spending that we'll need. Since 1970, the Soviet Union has undergone a massive military buildup, far outstripping any need for defense. They've spent $300 billion more than we have for military forces, resulting in a significant numerical advantage in strategic nuclear delivery systems, tactical aircraft, submarines, artillery, and anti-aircraft defense. Now, to allow this defense or this imbalance to continue is a threat to our national security. It's my duty as President and all of our responsibility as citizens to keep this country strong enough to remain free. As union members and as concerned citizens of the world, we watch with great interest the struggle of our fellow workers in Poland. Their courage reminds us not only of the precious liberty that is ours to nourish and protect, but of the spirit in each of us everywhere. The Polish workers stand as sentinels on behalf of universal human principles, and they remind us that on this good earth, the people will always prevail. They serve to show us how trust and unity keep alive the very purpose of our existence. And they remind us that man's work is not only directed at providing physical sustenance, but that the toil of men and women everywhere must also have the goal of feeding the spirit of freedom. As we work to solve our economic problems, let us tap that well of human spirit. We'll find more than strength of numbers and strength of resources. We'll find strength of individual determination. We may even find strength in mutual trust. For too many years now, we've trusted numbers and computers. We've trusted balance sheets, organization charts, policies, and systems. We've placed trust in rules, regulations, and government. Government dictates. Well, I think it's about time that we placed trust in ourselves. I'm here today because I salute what you've done for America. In your work, you build. In your personal lives, you sustain the core of family and neighborhood. In your faith, you sustain our religious principles. And with your strong patriotism, you're the bulwark which supports an America second to none in the world. I believe the American people are with us in our cause. I'm confident in our ability to work together to meet and surmount our problems and to accomplish the goals that we all seek. Now, I know that we can't make things right overnight, but we will make them right. Our destiny is not our fate. It is our choice. And I'm asking you, as I ask all Americans, in these months of decision, please join me as we take this new path. You and your forebears built our nation. Now, please help us rebuild it. And together, we'll make America great again. Thank you very much.
President Reagan, in a speech that lasted about 19 minutes, drew applause 4 times from this group. Here's a president defending his new economic program right in the den of labor. The members of the dais according the President of the United States the courtesies due him as a human being and certainly as the occupier of that office. But he is aware that there are some men on that dais who do not share his point of view. Robert Georgine, the head of the AFL-CIO's Building and Construction Trades Department, said his group will oppose many of the proposed budget cuts, and the communications workers President Glenn Watts called Mr. Reagan's package cold, insensitive, and impersonal. The president knew he had his work cut out for him when he entered that ballroom, and he delivered a very firm speech arguing for his programs. One thing that we make special note of is the reference to Poland. We are familiar with the ability of a president to use any forum, whatever, to make certain points, and be assured that the words the president uttered about Polish workers will be reported in Poland long before any Americans in this country are having dinner tonight. At one point, the president referred to the members of Solidarity as our fellow workers in Poland. He said the Polish workers stand as sentinels on behalf of universal human principles. President Reagan's way of indicating to the people of Poland and certainly to the Soviet Union that this administration is very much concerned about the situation and is watching it virtually hour by hour. I'm Bernard Shaw. That's the latest from our Cable News Network Bureau here in Washington.
And when we return, we will look closely at the current labor crisis in Poland.
Elsa, how about a piece of my wife's cherry pie?
Mr. White, I haven't eaten cherry pie since I got dentures.
Oh?
Cherry stained my dentures.
Discover extra strength Efferdent.
Extra strength?
Removes even stubborn stains between teeth. This denture material's covered with baked-on cherry stain, but Efferdent has 5 powerful cleaning ingredients to remove that tough cherry stain.
Clean, even in between.
Well,
I'll take the Efferdent and the pie.
Efferdent removes even stubborn stains between teeth in minutes.
Whoa. Something smells mighty good in there. Mary, home cooking?
Got the whole family together.
Well, I've got the family's dessert. Pepperidge Farm fresh frozen layer cake, 3 layers high, with fluffy smooth icing, about as moist as cake can be.
Wow, Mom, cake too?
Good home cooking deserves layer cake that's old-fashioned good, 'cause Pepperidge Farm remembers.
Refreshingly cool. Deliciously inviting. Delightfully appealing. 100% pure orange juice from Florida. It isn't just for breakfast anymore.
There are 2 things about X-Lax you should know. It works overnight, which is good, but it contains an artificial chemical. Metamucil, on the other hand, is all natural, which is good, but it can take up to 3 days to work. So where do you turn for fast relief and natural active ingredients? To New Nature's Remedy Laxative. Nature's Remedy has only natural active ingredients, and it gently relieves your constipation overnight. New Nature's Remedy. The gentleness you want, the speed you need.
The general strike threatened for tomorrow in Poland has been suspended. The Polish PAP news agency says Solidarity's National Commission will meet tomorrow to decide whether to call off the strike indefinitely. An agreement appears to have been reached between government representatives and union officials meeting today in Warsaw, but no details are available. Earlier today, union negotiators had pushed back the time for the final strike decision by 5 hours to allow bargaining to continue. The strike was called to protest violent police beatings of union activists. The threatened strike had put the nation in its worst crisis since the widespread walkouts last summer and had increased the possibility of Soviet military intervention in Poland.
In his weekly address to St. Peter's Square, Pope John Paul II warned against any kind of intervention in the affairs of Poland. The Pontiff said that the Polish people have the right to overcome their own problems and are able to do so. The Pope did not mention the Soviet Union by name, but he warned that any intervention in Poland would violate the 1975 Helsinki Accords. The Pope's message came one day after he sent a letter to a Polish cardinal asking Solidarity to show patience and perseverance in their negotiations with the government.
Hijackers holding an Indonesian airliner in Bangkok let a deadline for meeting their demands pass this morning without incident. The 6 gunmen had originally demanded $1.5 million ransom and the release of 84 political prisoners by 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Later, the hijackers said they only wanted a response to their demands at that time. Thai commandos have surrounded the plane. They vow the seizure will end today by whatever means necessary. Their words. One of the hostages on board yesterday escaped unnoticed through a rear emergency exit on the plane. But then hours later, the hijackers shot 2 of the other hostages, one of them an American. They are reported now in stable condition. Indonesia has agreed to part of the demands by the hijackers. Thai officials say Indonesia agreed to release 53 political prisoners moments before this morning's deadline passed. There has been no response reported from the hijackers, who still hold about 50 hostages.
A 2-week trade meeting between China and the European Economic Community opened today in Brussels. Chinese Vice Premier Gu Mu assured the common market countries that cuts in China's external trade are only temporary. CNN's Mark Leff has more.
After trade relations between the common market and China were established 5 years ago, $2.5 billion worth of goods were bought and sold by the trading partners to each other during the first year alone. That figure has doubled since 1976, and Chinese exports to Europe have been making up a greater and greater proportion of the amount as the years have gone by. The big Chinese exports destined for common market countries are furs, petroleum, tungsten ore, raw silk, and leather, while technical equipment and rolled steel are what make up the bulk of the Europe to China trade. Despite the steady growth, both partners have run into problems recently, both economic and political. Recession in Europe and a shifting of economic targets in Peking have slowed trade somewhat, and China just broke diplomatic relations with Holland, the current president of the EEC Council of Ministers, in a dispute over the proposed sale of Dutch submarines to Taiwan. Although China's total worldwide import bill last year totaled less than the EEC's exports to Switzerland, both parties are keen to improve their trading relationship. China has sent its biggest ever economic delegation to Brussels for a major trade promotion meeting due to last 2 weeks. The 100 Chinese representatives, headed by Vice Premier Gu Mu, are to meet representatives of some 300 European companies and banks. European Commission President Gaston Thorn said at the opening ceremonies that he expected the trade week to provide a strong stimulus to bilateral trade. The enormous economic potential of both sides, he said, had not been used enough so far. Vice Premier Gu said China was determined to maintain its open-door policies, and he said cooperation between China and the EEC was in the fundamental interests of people all over the world. Mark Leff, Cable News Network.
China has undergone massive changes over the past 15 years. Those changes are affecting Chinese technology, agriculture, and education. Peking University, a dream for thousands of Chinese who want a better education. For every 20 young Chinese who take the entrance examination to Peking University, only one will make it. But now for academic merit and not for political protection. The political opening of China to the world has one major obstacle. The Chinese language is extremely difficult. Therefore, the government's proposed solution is for the people to learn other languages. The class struggle has been replaced by the dedication to studies. Those who know more will advance faster, with better salaries and greater access to consumer products. The political winds that are now blowing from the West are welcome to a people tired of political and ideological campaigns. China has new priorities, priorities that start here, with the children, in the first phases of their school years. 500 million Chinese, in other words, half the country's population, is under 25 years of age. And of these, 240 million are students from kindergarten to the university level. In the schools that are also nurseries where the children stay all day while their parents are working, only the arts have the same importance as the sciences. It is patriotic to learn, to study, to want to be a technician, an agronomist, a professor. Mao's theory that the people had to think as a whole is now being challenged by the personal ambition to be somebody, and not only to think as a part of the mass. We interrupt. There's been a late development. Shots reported fired outside the hotel where President Reagan spoke a short while ago. Here's Bernard Shaw in our Washington Bureau.
Bob, as you can understand, details are very sketchy. We don't know precisely what happened, nor... Pardon me. Okay, my apology. Details are very sketchy at this moment. We don't know precisely what happened. We don't know the sequence. First of all, the president is safe. We are told that shots were fired at his party as he left the hotel. The District of Columbia Metropolitan Police report that at least one police officer and one Secret Service agent have been injured. They were shot down. Their condition, we do not know. We are checking both with the Secret Service and with people up at the hotel, as well as with the CNN crew and correspondent Bob Berkowitz. Briefly, we can report that shots were fired as President Reagan left the Washington Hilton Hotel following that address we carried live here on CNN. The president did not appear to be hurt, according to United Press International. Mr. Reagan was pushed inside his waiting presidential limousine by several Secret Service men immediately after the shots rang out. They were just to his right and behind him. The shots, according to United Press International, were fired just to the president's right and behind him by an unknown male. Again, briefly, shots rang out as President Reagan left the Washington Hilton Hotel this afternoon. Shortly after the speech, you saw him deliver live here in the Cable News Network. We are told the president is safe. He was not harmed. The shots, according to United Press International, came just to his right and behind the president. The shots, according to UPI, came from an unknown male. We have confirmation, according to the police, that at least one Secret Service agent and one District of Columbia policeman were wounded. We will be bringing you the details, of course, as soon as they become available. We're checking with the Secret Service. The ride back to the White House from the Washington Hilton Hotel is not a very long ride. He could be back at the White House in a matter of moments. We're making all of the necessary checks for you, and we'll keep you posted. But very calmly, the President of the United States, physically, he is well. He was rushed into his limousine when the shots rang out. Whether or not the police or the Secret Service have in custody the would-be assailant, we just don't know at this time. You can understand the details are very sketchy and things are in a state of flurry here in Washington. For now, let us say that's the latest from our Cable News Network Bureau. We'll come right back to you as soon as we get more confirmed facts and details. Now back to Atlanta.
Okay, of course, some of the unanswered questions so far. There have been no arrests, we assume. We don't know whether it was a rifle or a pistol. We don't know how far away the assailant was, or the intended assailant, and we do know that at least reported that one Secret Service agent was hit and also a D.C. policeman. We do not know how badly they were hurt. All we do know is that the president is safe, and we'll get back, of course, to Washington just as soon as there are new developments. Meanwhile, in other news, residents of a small Dutch town are now being evacuated because explosives from World War II have been found buried nearby. CNN's James Allen Miklashevsky has that story.
During World War II, the sight and sound of the Germans' V-1 rockets sent Europeans fleeing for their lives. The dreaded buzz bomb, so nicknamed because of the sound it made as it passed overhead, proved a valuable tactical weapon for the Germans. The self-propelled missile was deadly efficient. Nearly 40 years later, the V-1 has Europeans fleeing once more. This time from Grosel, Holland, where the biggest cleanup operation of abandoned V-1 rockets is underway. The Germans used the area as a launch site from which to bombard nearby Antwerp in Belgium. Upon their retreat, the Germans left behind some 36 of the missiles buried in the area around Grosel. 100 police and bomb experts are taking part in the first phase of the rocket recovery operation, in which 19 of the bombs containing nearly 4,000 pounds of live explosives will be removed. Meanwhile, many of the residents in Grosel are being evacuated from the area during the critical period of recovery. Unlike the victims of World War II, the people of Grosel should be able to return to their homes once the operation is complete. James Allen Miklashevsky, Cable News Network.
The two cosmonauts launched into space just over a week ago are reported back on Earth today, safe and sound, according to the Soviet news agency TASS. TASS says the cosmonauts parachuted to a soft landing in the plains of Kazakhstan, about 1,500 miles east-southeast of Moscow. They left behind two other cosmonauts in the orbiting space lab Salyut 6. The two who returned today had gone to the space lab on a research and resupply mission, according to TASS.
The National Cattlemen's Association says that supplies of meat and beef are much larger than had been forecast. This means that prices are likely to be lower than expected in those coming months. The group said that the beef production will increase by about 4% in 1981, and that should be good news for consumers. The association's survey of beef prices indicates the average price fell 6 cents a pound in March, below February's prices. The association also says nationwide, ground beef is averaging about $1.50 a pound, and that, says the Beef Producers Group, makes it a very good food buy. Bob?
As we reported moments ago, there were shots fired just as President Reagan emerged from the Washington Hilton Hotel today after delivering a speech. Further details now from Bernard Shaw in our Washington Bureau.
Bob, the situation is still fluid, but first of all, uppermost, the President of the United States physically is well. When the shots rang out from an unidentified male would-be assailant, the President was startled. He reportedly looked over in the direction from which the shots came, and of course the Secret Service agents, realizing what was going on, shouted at him and helped him very quickly into the limousine, and of course they got out of there. The place was just outside the Washington Hilton Hotel. The President had had delivered that address to the AFL-CIO. There have been some casualties in this shooting incident. We are told that at least one Secret Service agent, one policeman, and now we're told that White House Press Secretary Jim Brady was shot in the head. Those are the basic details as we know them right now. According to this late word, the assailant is identified only as a young white male said to be in police or Secret Service custody. We will try to find out exactly who is holding the alleged assailant. Eyewitnesses on the scene report that the shots initially sounded like firecrackers. The incident took place approximately 2:30 Eastern Time. That was just less than 9 minutes ago. Approximately 4 shots were fired at the president as he was leaving the Washington Hilton Hotel. To say again, and will continue to say this, the president is okay. He was not wounded or hurt in any way. We're told that White House Press Secretary Jim Brady was shot in the head. What his condition is, we just don't know at this point. A Secret Service agent was wounded, as was a District of Columbia police. We have people fanning out all over the downtown area. Correspondent Scott Barrett has gone to George Washington University Hospital. Correspondent Dave Browdy is at the intersection of 2000 and P, all these areas in the downtown Washington area. Just to set the scene as to what happened, the president, if you were watching CNN, delivered this address to the AFL-CIO Building Trades Union at the Washington Hilton Hotel downtown. As he was leaving the hotel, shots rang out, at least 4 shots. Some people say they sounded like firecrackers. The president glanced over his shoulder, noticed where the shots were firing, then of course he was shoved into his limousine and they took off, presumably for the White House. The casualties, the president incidentally was not injured. The casualties include 1 District of Columbia policeman, 1 Secret Service agent, and we're told White House Press Secretary James Brady. The shots were fired when the president left the hotel. Mr. Reagan did not appear to be hurt. He was startled by the gunshots. A Secret Service agent shouted to bystanders, "Get back, get back." And Mr. Reagan was pivoted by the agents and shoved into the car, and of course they took off. That is Justice, pardon me, please.
Bob Berkowitz.
Hello, Bob. Yes, we're on the air live. This is correspondent Bob Berkowitz. Bob, as you tell me what you tell me, I'll repeat it for our viewers. The situation around the Hilton Hotel, Berkowitz reports, is one of chaos right now. David Prospere, White House press spokesman, has told Berkowitz, yes, Bob? Somebody took some shots at the president. Yes, and we can confirm to you that the president indeed is okay. One of the White House press spokesmen said someone took some shots at the president, and he said we're told that the president is okay, and as we've told you and we'll tell Bob Berkowitz, that's just how confused it is down there at the scene. The president is okay. And now the White House says, from the White House, the president was not hit by gunfire. Yes, Bob? Jim Brady was hit. According to one of the press office officials from the White House, is his first name David? David Prospere? Okay, he says that Jim Brady was hit in the head, and according to Prospere, he says it does not look that good. It does not look good for Jim Brady. Do we know which hospital? Right, we were told that a Secret Service agent as well as a policeman had been shot also. I presume, Bob, that the president is back at the White House now. Right. Berkowitz reports that ambulances are pouring in and out of the area around the Hilton Hotel, which is a rather congested area, but of course in this kind of emergency they have priority. Brady, I'm told, Bob, I should tell you, I've just been told in my left ear that Jim Brady is still on the ground at the hotel, which I would infer from that, as you said, it does not look good for him, but I would infer that the wound must be awfully serious if he's not been taken away. I should pass this on to you, Bob Berkowitz. Police officers and Secret Service agents tackled the assailant and pushed him to the ground as the motorcade sped away. The White House says Mr. Reagan was not, repeat, not hit by any of the shots. There were approximately 4 shots fired, each retort sounding like a firecracker as it exploded from the gun. It appeared as if the shots were fired from some sort of pistol at close range, possibly as little as 10 feet from the chief executive, from President Reagan. There are unconfirmed reports that the slug struck up to 2 or 3 bystanders. So we know that a Secret Service agent was hit. We know that Jim Brady, the president's secretary, press secretary, was hit, and we know that a policeman also was hit. Bob, where are you going now? Okay, if you hear anything, please call us right away. Thank you. Our White House correspondent, Bob Berkowitz, at the scene to sum up what he's just told, and we've passed on to you. The scene, of course, is one of confusion because of what has happened. Again, the President of the United States is okay. We guess that he is back at the White House. The White House put out a statement saying that the President was not hurt. However, Press Secretary James Brady, according to our man there at the scene, Bob Berkowitz, Jim Brady, still on the ground being tended to by emergency medical crews. A Secret Service agent was hit by one of the shots, as was a District of Columbia policeman. All of this erupted as President Reagan was leaving the Washington Hilton Hotel. He had finished his address and the shots rang out approximately 2:30 this afternoon. Mr. Reagan had just walked out of the building on the Florida Avenue side of the hotel. I know the hotel. I used to live in the neighborhood just a block and a half from the hotel. The assailant was waiting to Mr. Reagan's left and behind the president. The president turned when the shots were fired, placing the assailant behind him and to his rear. Several police officers pinned the assailant to the ground while the Secret Service agents pushed President Reagan into the limousine, and of course the limousine went back. We are told, hold it, this is the first picture we have. One wants to assume that the alleged assailant is right there. You see a Secret Service agent with his automatic, it looks like an Israeli-made Uzi submachine gun. They have subdued the man against the wall. That's right on the Florida Avenue side of the hotel. There's a police, that's Jim Brady there to the right in the dark suit. That's Jim Brady. And that could be a Secret Service agent to your left and at the upper left-hand side of your screen. Oddly enough, these are one of the things that all of us here in the Washington Press Corps, this man is shackled. You see them leading him away to a district squad car. As you're watching these pictures back in time, the president's limousine left. As soon as the shots rang out, he was shoved into the limousine, and they quickly tore out of there to get back to the best sanctuary there is in this city, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Correspondent Bob Berkowitz told us on the telephone that the scene was one of confusion. That's understandable. As the camera comes back to the right, here you see the carnage. We know that Jim Brady is on the ground with a head wound, a Secret Service agent, and there's a policeman, a District of Columbia policeman somewhere in this group. I think we see 1, 2, 3. There are 3 people on the ground. And my guess is that that's Jim Brady. It is Jim Brady. That's Jim Brady being tended to. It looks like he was shot right over the left eye or somewhere on the left side of the temple. This is the picture on Florida Avenue. That's on the south side of the Washington Hilton Hotel. Traditionally, when a president uses that hotel, no matter where he enters, and there are several places from which to enter, the security has had it that he always comes out on the Florida Avenue side. on the Florida Avenue side, the south side of that building, and that's how they came out. And of course, the more picture, here's the president. There are the shots. The shots came from the right in the corner of your screen. There's Jim Brady, the policeman just to the end of Jim Brady. The gunman was waiting right by the wall as the president came out of that Florida Avenue entrance of the Washington Hilton Hotel. You heard the shots in quick succession, about 4 shots. And obviously, if the president was able to duck and be shoved into the limousine, that's James Brady, the White House press secretary right there, the gunman had to have been shooting in such a manner that Brady, the Secret Service agent, the policeman standing in the way were actually blocking the gunman's line of sight. And only that, their presence saved the president, because the shots, as you saw and heard, came very quickly. 4 shots, very quickly. The president was quickly shoved into the limousine, and the agents around the president pinned the man against the wall. We can barely see him. Pinned him against the wall. The president's limousine tore out quickly to get back to the White House, and the assailant was taken into custody. Since he was stuffed into a District of Columbia police car, we assumed that initially anyway, these early moments of this tragedy, the president's okay, it's a tragedy in that other people were wounded. In the initial moments of this tragedy, the District of Columbia police have initial custody of the man, but of course the federal authorities prevailed. Bill Hensel, our desk assignment editor, just hands me a note that correspondent Scott Barrett reporting from George Washington University Hospital that the First Lady, Nancy Reagan, has just arrived at GWU Hospital. As we say, the president is okay, but of course, if he's back at the White House, he's certainly concerned about the carnage that lay on the street and the sidewalks back there. Here again is the scene. We will let you watch and listen. You saw a man running at the top of your picture with a briefcase. I don't know, the president has very key people around him when he's in public. Okay, now we are told that President Reagan has gone to George Washington University Hospital, where Jim Brady has been taken. That was Jim Brady earlier as he lay wounded on the sidewalk at the Florida Avenue entrance of the Washington Hilton Hotel, where the shots rang out, 4 shots, following the president's rather successful speech to the AFL-CIO, and that he had a chance to state his economic policies. This was the scene just a short while ago, less than a half hour ago. Brady on the ground, Secret Service agent on the ground, and in the middle of that frantic scene you see against the wall is the alleged assailant. Correspondent Scott Barrett sends word from George Washington University Hospital that First Lady Nancy Reagan has arrived there. President Reagan has gone there because the president's press secretary, James Brady, is wounded seriously. We do not know the status of the injuries incurred by the Secret Service agent, who is unidentified to us at the moment, as well as the District of Columbia policeman. They are working to put handcuffs on the would-be assailant. We're going to be going very, very shortly to correspondent Bob Berkowitz, who will be switching live to him, our White House correspondent who traveled up to the hotel with the president for that speech. Earlier, as we relayed to you, his word to me on the telephone was that the scene was very confused up there, which is understandable. I had one thought I didn't finish. We saw a man with a briefcase. Everybody traveling with the president, the immediate people around him, have important functions, and you know of the man who carries the leather football, the briefcase with the codes which a president would use should he ever have the necessity to do so. Let's switch now live to correspondents Bob Berkowitz and Dave Browdy. Gentlemen.
We're with correspondent David Browdy here at the Hilton Hotel. David has spoken to an eyewitness, so let me just turn it over to Dave. Dave?
Bob, the eyewitness was an ABC News cameraman who was standing outside the Hilton working in the travel pool that accompanies the president wherever he goes. The man who fired the shots, according to Henry Brown, was a white male with blonde hair, about 40 years old, who had actually penetrated the group of reporters that was standing outside the Hilton. As Henry described it, the crowd began to cheer as the president left the Hilton after making his speech, and then this man just started shooting. According to the eyewitness, Henry Brown, several people were hit. One Secret Service woman, one District of Columbia policeman, and James Brady, the White House press secretary. The president, he said, was not hit, and though the president was quickly removed from the scene, he is completely uninjured, according to the eyewitnesses. The man was captured by the Secret Service after a struggle. We do not have his name yet. Henry Brown said he couldn't tell what kind of condition he was in. Bob?
And that's about all that we know from the Hilton Hotel. David Brady with Bob Berkowitz. Back to you, Bernie.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We are told that the White House will have a statement in about 20 minutes, actually about 18 minutes. When the White House issues that statement, of course, we will carry it live. I'm also told that President Reagan might have slightly hurt himself just a little bit as he was getting into that limousine. Of course, the Secret Service, with their primary objective, protecting the chief executive, once those shots rang out and the president was okay, he was just bodily shoved right through that door. And of course, when you're getting into a car in a hurry, you might hurt something, but he is quite alive. He's quite well. The president has gone to George Washington University Hospital, as has First Lady Nancy Reagan. They're going there for the obvious reason to maintain a vigil and watch over as doctors work on James Brady. As we saw him on the sidewalk a few moments ago on the videotape we have replayed, it appeared that Jim Brady sustained a wound on the left side of his face, because that was the side of his face touching the sidewalk. We do not know the names nor the conditions of the Secret Service agent and the District of Columbia policeman who also were shot. If you're just tuning in, President Reagan had concluded an address which was carried live by the cable news network starting at about 2:05. We finished the speech, and as the president was leaving the Florida Avenue, or the south side entrance of the Washington Hilton Hotel, 4 shots rang out, and the shots came from less than 12 feet near the president. The would-be assailant was flung against the wall by a combined group of security forces, Secret Service, White House police, District of Columbia police, I should say. The man was subdued. The 4 shots just went in the president's direction. Luckily, the president was shielded, as it happened, by a wall which consisted of James Brady, a Secret Service agent, and a District of Columbia policeman. All 3 were hit and wounded. The president was not wounded. He ducked, as you saw in the picture, and then he was bodily shoved into the back of his limousine. It sped off, and the authorities subdued the alleged assailant. We do not have an identity on him yet. James Brady eventually was taken by emergency ambulance to George Washington University Hospital. I can assume, I believe, I can't assume, but possibly, quite possibly, the Secret Service agent and the policeman also were taken there. The President and Mrs. Reagan have gone to the hospital to maintain a vigil. More information on this incident here in Washington. This is from United Press International. The assailant was a young white blonde male, and he was shoved into a District of Columbia squad car shortly after the incident. We saw that. Ambulances sped to the scene to take Brady to the hospital. Apparently, Brady was struck in the head, blood pouring profusely from the wound. The severity of his wounds was not immediately known. We told you that when he left, the president, left the hotel. That's when the shots rang out. Brady was just a step or 2 behind Mr. Reagan as the presidential party was leaving the hotel. Mr. Reagan went to the hospital, George Washington University Hospital, where Jim Brady was taken. Larry Speakes, a deputy White House press secretary, passing on word. Here is further word from our people here who are working frantically to bring the latest information. Ed Meese, James Baker, and Larry Speakes, all on the president's staff. The president's, I'm just having a mental lapse right now. Edwin Meese is the president's chief of staff, or rather James Brady is. James Baker is the president's chief of staff. Ed Meese, of course, is the president's top advisor at the White House, and Larry Speakes, one of the deputy press spokesmen. All have gone to George Washington University Hospital, and we're now told that a statement will be made at the hospital. We had said that the statement would be coming from the White House in about 20 minutes. Actually, the White House is wherever the president is in press terms and in terms of conducting business, so that statement will come from the White House. If you're just tuning in, to repeat, the president was leaving the Washington Hilton Hotel, and this is it. Let's listen.
There you saw what happened, the crowd calling to the president as he emerged from the Washington Hilton.
Okay, that is the picture as it occurred less than a half hour ago. In the instant pandemonium, you saw the president, when he heard the shots, he too ducked. And then, of course, the Secret Service agents swung into action, shoved the president into the limousine, and they took off. Again, 3 people injured in this shooting. The President of the United States is okay. We are going to go to the White House briefing room. Many people have assembled here to await some official word. When it comes, whoever is going to conduct the briefing will be switching there live. President Reagan, Mrs. Reagan are at George Washington University Hospital. Obviously and understandably very concerned about everyone wounded this afternoon. James Brady, the president's press secretary, he's known Mr. Reagan for a long, long time. He is wounded seriously. We do not have the identities of the other 2 people wounded in this affair, a Secret Service agent and a District of Columbia policeman. One of our colleagues who has been in this town for an awfully long time has been moving about the newsroom. Daniel Shore is back here in Washington. He was away on medical leave for a while, and maybe in a little while we'll have Dan here with us. We cannot say it too many times. The President of the United States is okay. As soon as the bulletin moves on something like this, everywhere from Wall Street to the far reaches of the world, people are wondering, and that's why we are repeating this. The president physically is okay. He was not shot. He was not wounded. He might have been slightly roughed up a little bit as the Secret Service agents sought to get him into that bulletproof limousine as quickly as possible. And now I'm told the president sustained a bump while being pushed into that car. But luckily, he was not wounded. He is quite okay. We cannot report the same for White House Press Secretary James Brady. Also, we cannot report the same for an unidentified Secret Service agent and an unidentified District of Columbia policeman. They sustained injuries as those 4 shots rang out on the videotape that you've seen a couple times so far, and we'll be showing it to you again. The gunman is in custody, and he was hustled away by a District of Columbia police squad car with Secret Service agents, by other people who were following the president as he moved. And of those 3 people, one was Press Secretary James Brady and the Secret Service agent and the District of Columbia policeman. If I sound as if I'm speaking haltingly to you as we're talking, we're receiving information in our left ear, and sometimes you have to coordinate the 2. But I'm being told that in a little while we may have something from the White House, and if we do, we'll be going there live. There's correspondent Mark Walton, who just walked across the front of the screen, and that he's walking indicates that they're not ready yet to say anything officially. Our senior producer, Scott Willis, is telling me now about 10 minutes away from the briefing. If by chance you're just tuning in, President Reagan is all right. Some others right now are not okay. A gunman fired at least 4 shots at the president as he was leaving the Washington Hilton Hotel. Mr. Reagan ducked, and the agent shoved him into the car. Those wounded include James Brady, the president's press secretary, a Secret Service agent, a policeman. Brady was rushed to George Washington University Hospital. First Lady Nancy Reagan, President Reagan, they are at the hospital and they are waiting. His doctors and nurses work on Mr. Brady and also work on those who are injured. We don't have confirmed exactly where the Secret Service agent or the policeman were taken. Dan Shore, these are the kinds of moments that we always dread, and it's always in the back of our minds as we cover the president and watch him.
Fanatic, a cause to be vindicated, however rightly or wrongly. And interesting that it would happen so early in the administration of President Reagan, who has made almost a hallmark of his administration of opposing terrorism. Terrorism has been such an important word from the very start of his administration. He talked, of course, of terrorism directed against Americans abroad and promised swift and effective retribution. Whether there is this aura of violence in the air, what that has to do with it, we wait to find out. But indeed, it is tragic that the President of the United States cannot go and deliver a speech to a labor organization without always that ever-present fear of one demented or fanatical person acting out some kind of cause of his own.
Dan, I'm told that we now have an interview with an eyewitness.
People cheered.
Correspondent Dave Browdy interviewed this.
As he got to the car, I remember about 4 to 5 shots going on. And I saw Brady going down, Secret Service agents going down, a police officer going down. And as before them going down, I was going down. When I turned, the direction of the sound, and there was a man with a gun, a white male, blind hair. And he was still firing. The agents were still wrestling with him. He looked pretty close to 29, in his late 20s or early 30s. About 10 feet away from Reagan. He was in 45 shots. And he was hitting the agents and police officers. He was in the line of fire of Reagan. Did you see him actually shooting? I thought about maybe the last shot. Yeah. No. I heard 4 to 5 shots and they all came from the same direction. Henry, was he up top or was he standing down? He was 2 people. He was like the next camera person position over from me. He was penetrated in the press line. Henry, just tell us go through it again. Just tell us what you saw and where the guy was. Henry.
That is a picture of an interview, Dave Browdy talking with an ABC network cameraman. I've forgotten Hank's last name. I do know his first name is Hank. We're going to be showing you next some picture at George Washington University as a hospital, as one of the injured in the shooting incident out of the hotel was brought quickly to GWU Hospital. It's a very quick ride from the Washington Hilton Hotel area. And of course, when you're coming in an ambulance and under these circumstances, you have the right of way. We don't know who was brought to the hospital in this particular ambulance. This is just the raw picture as it was shot and as we were able to get it to you. Dan, as you were speaking earlier, it's rare that a president is shot at here in the nation's capital. We know that there is, well, a sense of security in this town because the security people all know this town so well. Here's the scene again as the president was leaving.
The president is being pushed into his car, of course, with the first shots which we did hear. At the same time, down on the floor is Jim Brady, who's been shot in the head, the president's press secretary.
Dan, I don't...
Off in a corner, they have cornered the suspect in this, who will be later brought over to one squad car and for some reason then to another. They are equally concerned with holding him and in protecting him.
That's Jim Brady there.
There's Jim Brady lying on the floor with his familiar balding head, which is now hurt. And it seems to be only a few feet away that there are clustered the police who are holding on to the suspect in the case.
That was a Secret Service agent there in the gray suit. I was about to say, security officials feel rather comfortable about protecting the president here in Washington. This is the ambulance, Dan, picture that was shot just outside George Washington University Hospital. President and Mrs. Reagan are there. Press Secretary James Brady had been rushed there.
Barrett reports the president was shot once in the left chest.
Who does?
Scott Barrett reported the president has been shot once in the left chest in the hospital.
Correspondent Scott Barrett, you may have heard that, sends word from the hospital that the president was shot in the left chest. Is that correct? Just a moment. Things are in a state of confusion, so please stay with us. We want to be certain that our information is correct. And I can hear the word coming over our two-way radio, Dan, but I'll wait for somebody in the back room to come up here and tell us. We had been reporting to you that the president was not injured. In fact, the White House has said the president was not hurt, but now we're getting some other word, and we have our man at the scene. I'm just going to pause here for a moment because we don't want to misreport. Okay, just a second, pardon me. Okay. While we are waiting, just to tie down once and for all that, we're going to be, look, can we hold for just a moment? What is the correct word?
He's in stable condition yet, but he's not in surgery yet, he's conscious.
Okay, the president, okay, shot once in the left chest near the, okay, Daniel Shore, we've just been given this hard word. The president was shot once in the left chest near the left arm. According to Lynn Nofsinger, the president is conscious.
And
I wonder
is
why
said to be in stable condition.
In stable condition. I wonder why the lapse in time.
One can only suppose that at the first shot you could see on the
Let's
video
look at
tape,
this picture, Dan, as we're watching this,
which is being shown in slow motion, as the president coming out of the Washington Hilton Hotel, having just finished his speech, and he's waving to a cluster of people outside. We've seen this before, but we'll see it slowly now.
Let's watch the left side of his body to see if he indicates. That's his left hand going up. There the shots are going now.
And the president is simply shoved into the car. Whether or not he's been shot, I don't think it would have mattered at that point to the Secret Service, to whom it is SOP standard procedure that at the first shot, what you must do is see to the protection of the president. At that point, I would imagine that nobody had any idea if he was shot or not. They wanted to get him into the protection of the car. Why it was that later the White House said that the president had been unhurt and unharmed, I don't know, because within a few minutes somebody must have known, and the president's limousine has radio contact. There we see it again.
Now, when he gets to the limousine, let's just watch just before his head goes in and see if there's any facial expression or anything to indicate. Just as we see his head near the door, let's watch to see even the slightest indication that he was nicked. He's getting a shove from the agent in the back.
His face reveals no outward sign of
watch
having...
the head just a little bit when it gets past that gap there, past the window. Right there, I was wondering. Did you see the head tilt to the left? It's hard to tell.
Yes, Bernie, but it is very hard to tell because so much of his reaction is a reaction to simply the physical pressure that's behind him. And it must also be said, and it's turned out to be in other cases of shootings, that sometimes in the midst of excitement of that sort that there is a delayed reaction and that the president himself may not have been immediately aware that almost simultaneously with the shot you got the measures taken to see to his protection. And I would doubt whether anybody could say one way or the other from that videotape whether one knew that. But in any event, it was apparently took some time. First we heard that the president was not returning to the White House, but instead going to the hospital.
The alleged assailant.
Is the person who is now in custody as a suspect.
Okay, and as you said earlier, the president is in stable condition. The president is conscious, and our word from the hospital is that he has not gone into surgery. First Lady Nancy Reagan is at the hospital. White House Press Secretary James Brady is there. He was injured in the head, as was a Secret Service agent and a policeman.
Right. You were suggesting earlier, and I think you made an interesting point, that with all the assassination attempts on presidents, they usually happen outside Washington. Yes. I mean, Dallas was Dallas, President Ford. There were 2 attempts in California. And that usually the Secret Service has Washington so mapped out, so laid out.
This town is sewed up.
That it is very difficult. On the other hand, as has always been said, as President Kennedy once said, that there is no security that is security enough against one lone person. They can find out conspiracies, they can get militant organizations, but there is, in any crowd of people in the American way, short of keeping the president imprisoned in the White House, there is no way of stopping this happening every once in a while.
Okay, the police officer, the District of Columbia police officer who was wounded outside the Washington Hilton Hotel has been taken to the Washington Hospital Center, where he is in critical condition. His name has not been released, and we're still checking with the Secret Service to find out the identity. United Press International reporting what we've reported. The president was shot in the chest and wounded by the gunman outside the Washington Hilton Hotel. He's reported in stable condition at George Washington University Hospital. This is how it looked and how it sounded less than an hour ago.
I guess you should mention for those tuning in late that this is obviously being shown in very slow motion.
Right, so that we can study it with you as you see it.
Notice how the Secret Service agents, one of whom you can see immediately in the foreground, another of them to the right of the president, as usual, look out over the crowd. They don't look at the president. It is their job to look for suspected motions, to look for what appear to be unusual signs of people moving their hands into and out of their pockets. And yet with all of this very careful drill, which over the years the Secret Service people have been trained in, one more time there was one more person who managed to get close to the president with a gun in his hand.
And this police officer on the left side of our screen, he will be among those ducking when the shots ring out. If I understood an interview earlier with that cameraman, I thought he said that someone had penetrated the ranks of the cameramen who were taking pictures as the president was leaving.
That's very unusual. All of them shots. Everyone who's close to the president and the press corps has been cleared by the Secret Service and usually carries identification. And especially in this case where the ABC was the so-called travel pool that is representing all the networks. There should have been few enough of them and familiar enough so that the Secret Service should have known every person standing outside and taking pictures. Well, what do you say? No one's perfect?
And of course, we all carry special White House credentials to identify ourselves. Here the president is getting that shove from the agent who has his hands on the president's shoulder blades, getting him down as quickly as possible.
This is presumably a wounded president, but they don't know it, whom they're pushing into the car.
Yeah, not until they pulled away did they realize it, apparently.
And maybe later. I don't know what.
Dan, of course, the experts are going to study this tape, this documentation, but it seems to me that just as the president's head clears that gap there from the back of the window to the side of the limousine, I see the president's head going to the left.
Well, I couldn't argue with you.
Well, no, but we'll find out for sure. President Reagan was shot in the chest by that gunman outside the Washington Hilton Hotel this afternoon. He's reported conscious and in stable condition at George Washington University Hospital. The gunman firing at close range also wounded White House Press Secretary James Brady in the head before being wrestled to the ground by the police. Let's switch now live to the White House briefing room and correspondent Mark Walton. Mark?
The White House has confirmed now, just in the last few minutes, that President Reagan has indeed been shot. His condition is listed as stable, which we understand means all his vital signs are normal and that he is in good condition. He was wounded in the left chest, we are told. Now, you'll know that earlier we were told that the president was not shot, that he had not been hit, that he had gone to the hospital to see his press secretary, Jim Brady, who it was confirmed earlier had been shot. But it turns out now in the last couple of minutes that the White House has confirmed that President Reagan has been shot. Apparently, he is in good condition, stable condition are the official words. This is Mark Walton, Cable News Network at the White House.
This is the picture again. I'm still intrigued by what I think I see as the president's head. In just a second, we'll clear that space between the end of the window and the side of the car. It's coming up in just a second. Right there. It seems to me that he ducked again, as if struck by something. I have no way of knowing.
Well, I don't think you're suggesting that he was struck at that point.
That's my impression.
I guess we'll have to find that out. I would assume that by that time, we don't know how many shots were fired.
Yeah.
We don't, and I guess it's idle for us to speculate. One of the things I'm waiting to find out,
yes,
as they go over this, is how many shots in all were fired and in what space of time. Because right after that, the president was, not so gently, but for his own benefit, shoved into the car. We then saw very soon thereafter the suspect already in custody.
Yes.
So I don't know. I think it should be added that no one is dead.
No one is dead.
There are no fatalities. Jim Brady appeared to be the most seriously hurt of all of them, but he's alive. We don't know his condition exactly, but we have been told, in case anybody suspects otherwise, that all of those who were injured, that is to say, the president, as we now know, Jim Brady, his press secretary, his Secret Service agent, and the District of Columbia police officer, all injured, and no one is dead.
Then Vice President Bush, who was out of the city, is being rushed back from Texas. And in just a little bit, we're going to be switching live to George Washington University Hospital. White House correspondent Bob Berkowitz and correspondent Scott Barrett are there, and they'll be bringing us up to date from the hospital, where the president, we know for sure, is being tended to, as well as Press Secretary James Brady. Let's switch over there live now.
You start off. Go.
Thank you. We're here at right across the street from George Washington Hospital. The President of the United States is in the hospital. Scott Barrett was here for a White House announcement on the President's condition. Scott?
Well, Bob, Lynn Knopfsinger came out and told us that President Reagan was shot in the left chest, close to his shoulder. He is alert. He is up. He hasn't gone into surgery yet. Shortly before Lynn came out, Ed Meese arrived, so did Jim Baker, and it's reported that Senator Laxalt has come into the hospital. Before that, Nancy Reagan arrived looking very distraught.
James Brady, the President's chief press spokesman, was also taken here. Brady was shot in the head. It seemed to be on the left side of his head. He was bleeding profusely, and he is also inside now being taken care of at George Washington Hospital. I spoke to an eyewitness earlier. He said that the man who shot the president was in his 45 to 50. He was of medium build, gray hair, and as of now, at least as far as we know here, that's all the information we have on him. That's the news from George Washington Hospital. Back to the Bureau.
Thank you, gentlemen. As more details are released at the site there, George Washington University Hospital, we will be able to bring them to you right away. Dan,
should be said, of all the great ironies last week, Vice President Bush was being put in charge of crisis management. Today there's a long article in the Washington Post about how Bush, who originally not much in the confidence of President Reagan, has slowly moved to an inside track, now very much in his confidence, and Reagan gave orders that everything he knows George Bush should know. What this was in anticipation of, we do not know, except he said, if that terrible thing should sometime happen, I want George Bush to know everything. Well, it wasn't a terrible thing, although clearly terrible enough. Bush now returns, and the fact that he has had that inside track, has been given the confidence of President Reagan, will undoubtedly stand him and I guess the whole country in good stead as he can move smoothly into being delegated to do whatever President Reagan would want him to do while he recovers.
One observation, but before that, to repeat, if you're just joining us, shots rang out at the Washington Hilton Hotel just outside, just after President Reagan had completed that address to the AFL-CIO. As he was leaving, the shots rang out. White House Press Secretary James Brady, President Reagan himself, a District of Columbia policeman, and a Secret Service agent were hit. The president is stable. He is at George Washington University Hospital. First Lady Nancy Reagan is there, and we are awaiting further word. The president has not had any surgery yet. The New York Stock Exchange has shut down. That word just passed us, Dan, and the thought that I was about to express was the scene is not difficult to imagine right now. We've just been told that the stock exchange has been closed, but be assured that every embassy representing countries around this globe right now, they're using every possible means of communication to let their host governments back home know precisely what's happening.
I think that's right, and having been in Europe at the time of the assassination of President Kennedy, I'm sure another thing is happening, is that security is being increased for every chief of state and chief of government around Europe and around the world, because sadly we have found out that there is a tendency in assassination attempts to trigger demented minds elsewhere around the world into imitative efforts. And I would not be surprised if you will find that security is being doubled around heads of government all over the world after this.
One of our trusted technical staff members, Vito Maciola, sends word that he has observed two boxes of blood being rushed to George Washington University Hospital by District of Columbia Police. Certainly that's understandable in view of the magnitude of the wounds, for one, suffered by James Brady.
Yeah, it should be mentioned with regard to the closing of the stock exchange to those to whom it may not be obvious that anything that causes this kind of concern and excitement is bound to have a reaction on the stock exchange. And in order to avoid big flurries at a time like this, it would be normal simply to close the stock exchange and stop trading. Otherwise, what you would probably get is an enormous dip in the value of stocks as people wonder what has happened in the White House.
Indeed, and you know, we have a very large audience of viewers in the Virgin Islands, and a lot of people are down in that part of the world, and they are being kept abreast of what's happening right now by the cable news network. The latest we get, we're passing it on to you wherever you are, if you're in Alaska, Hawaii, or elsewhere. The president is stable. Here's the picture again. Okay, we also have a report now that, before we tell you the report, this is the picture, and in the middle of this group of frenzied security people is the alleged assailant. At this point in time, this is videotape, but at this point in time, the president's limousine has taken off. That is Press Secretary James Brady on the ground. Behind them, a District of Columbia policeman in the black raincoat, and there's a body up at the end of the sidewalk in a gray suit. That is a Secret Service agent. The other agent standing guard there with an Uzi submachine gun. As they subdued the man, handcuffed him, and took him away, we're told now that there is an Air Force helicopter circling George Washington University Hospital.
For obvious reasons. We've also been told, and this should be somewhat reassuring, is that although it was discovered apparently a few minutes later that President Reagan had been hit in the left chest, as you have reported, that he apparently was strong enough and in good enough conditions so that when they arrived at the George Washington University Hospital, the president entered the hospital walking and under his own steam. So one has reason to hope that the wound of the president is not very serious.
This was the frenzied scene. We'll be seeing this again and again. Secret Service agents turning and calling for some further assistance. I was going to say, Dan, There's so many security agencies in this city. What do we have? We have the District of Columbia Police, the Secret Service, we have the Executive Protective Service. They guard the embassies.
They guard foreign embassies for the most part, yes.
Right. They guard foreign embassies. We've got the Federal Bureau of the Investigation, and there's a fifth one I can't remember, but each of these agencies has an interest in what we saw this afternoon. And we can just assume that
I leave out the Executive Protective Service, which was nowhere in evidence.
Okay. Secret Service.
And I'm afraid you have to leave out the FBI does not have, as we found out in the long Warren Commission investigation, the FBI has no responsibility for the physical protection of the president. The FBI may have some responsibility for counterintelligence and knowing what kind of people would do that kind of thing, but I don't think we should conduct an inquest now of what agency was responsible. The president is protected by the Secret Service. On an occasion when he appears in Washington, the District of Columbia Police would also be on hand. And in any event, I don't think with all 5 or 6 agencies it is ever possible to keep one person who was determined enough to do it. They did it with George Wallace.
Okay, you're making a different point. My point is that each of these agencies is interested in whatever interrogation is going on right now.
Oh, I'm sure that's right.
Okay, this is Lynn Nofziger, who is making a statement. He made the statement. We recorded it earlier as it was made at George Washington University Hospital.
It's political advisor to the president.
Has been shot once in the left chest. The bullet entered from his left side. He is in stable condition. He is conscious. And Mrs. Reagan is with him. And at this moment, we have nothing further to say. I cannot, but we know that Mr. Brady was shot. I have no report on his condition at this time. Not to my knowledge. Not at this moment. Going into surgery. I cannot tell you that. Yes, he is conscious. The president is conscious. One wound in the left chest. It did not hit the heart.
What did it hit?
It hit him in the left chest. Apparently, as near as I can tell, under the left arm. I cannot tell you. Any suspects? It is our understanding, and all I know on that is what I've read on the wire, that a suspect has been apprehended, but that's off the wire. Their personal knowledge. No, Mrs. Reagan was not with the president. Mrs. Reagan is now with the president, but she was at the White House.
Yeah, you lost whatever gas.
What
you finding out? We ain't got no power because I ain't got recording. Is he able to walk away? Is that all you need?
According to United Press International, Dan, White House officials said the president walked into the hospital. Nofziger said the president apparently did not immediately realize that he had been wounded.
Well, that's what seemed, I suggested that earlier, that happens. There is a flow of adrenaline on an occasion like that where you may not feel an injury. That has been known to happen, and doctors have talked about that. And that, I guess, is why it was not immediately said that the president had been hit. He apparently did not know for himself for a minute or two until he realized that something had happened. It's interesting that, ironic perhaps, that this briefing is being done by Lynn Nofziger, who was Governor Reagan's press secretary during the campaign and came back as a political advisor. This briefing would have been given by Jim Brady.
Yes.
If Brady were able to do it.
Yes. And here, again, the picture. This scene happened approximately 1 hour ago on the Florida Avenue side of the Washington Hilton Hotel. The president had just addressed the AFL-CIO. And that is how it looked. The president being shoved into the limousine once the report from the gun was heard. Several shots rang out. Then Senator Edward Kennedy was on the Senate floor upon learning of this incident that we've watched over and over. He issued a statement, which we will get to in just a moment. The legs of a Secret Service agent there reacting to being shot. The White House Press Secretary Jim Brady was in the foreground, and there was a District of Columbia policeman directly behind him. First Lady Nancy Reagan was not with the president when this happened, but she rushed to the hospital to be at his side. Vice President George Bush was en route to Texas for a speech. And because of the instant communications, once a word was flashed aboard the plane changed course and, of course, headed back here to Washington.
You were going to read Senator Kennedy's statement.
Senator Kennedy, once he heard of this incident, issued a statement. He was on the Senate floor. He said, "My family has been touched by violence. All of these good individuals had a common purpose for the good of this country." The good individuals, a reference to the president and his party. Senator Kennedy said, "Violence and hatred have no place. They have no party, no partisanship, no rationality. Violence and hatred are alien to everything this country is about." Shortly thereafter, Senate Majority Leader Howard Baker called the Senate into recess, citing the gravity of the situation here in Washington.
Speaking of that, Bernie, while you were reading that statement earlier, I asked Donna Rockwell of our staff to go back and do a little research into previous attempts on the lives of presidents. And it comes out this way. Going back to 1933, when Giuseppe Zangara made an attempt on the life of President Franklin Roosevelt with a pistol in Miami, Florida, and missed. And then in Washington in October 1950, Oscar Colago, Griselio Torricella tried a pistol attack on President Truman, and it was prevented. And finally, November 22nd, 1963, if anybody needs to be reminded, President Kennedy, Lee Harvey Oswald, the assailant in Dallas, Texas, and it worked. And then there were the two attempts on the life of President Ford. There was, first of all, Lynette Squeaky Fromm, September 5th, 1975, in Sacramento, California, who raised a pistol but never got to fire it. And then there was Sarah Jane Moore on September 22nd, 1975. Again, President Ford in San Francisco with a pistol that missed. That is, as far as our research goes, 1975, 6 years ago, was the last attempt on the life of a president. We managed to go for 6 years without that kind of diversion.
Then the Secret Service confirms the suspect in custody is identified as John W. Hinckley, Jr., Hinkley. Reportedly, he's 22 years old. He is from Evergreen, Colorado. This is the alleged would-be assailant. The Secret Service is confirming the suspect's identity is that of John W. Hinckley, Jr. He's 22 years old. Authorities say he is from Evergreen, Colorado.
We have some other names as well from the United Press International. Let's first say that James Brady, President Reagan's press secretary, was wheeled into a CAT scanning room. That's a sophisticated device to conduct a series of tests at 3:05 this afternoon, which is less than 45 minutes ago, on the first floor of the George Washington University Hospital. It is said here that his head was bandaged and he did not appear to be moving. So apparently at least unconscious. We do not yet know the name of the District of Columbia police officer, his name not immediately released. However, the wounded Secret Service man has now been tentatively identified as Timothy J. McCarthy.
Dan, in a little while, not just yet, but we're standing by to go to the White House. Should there be information, we will be switching there. If you have just turned on your television set and you're wondering what's going on, very briefly, the President of the United States had just concluded an address before the AFL-CIO at the Washington Hilton Hotel. He and his party were leaving through the south side of the building, the Florida Avenue side. And steps away from his limousine, shots rang out. Press Secretary James Brady fell to the pavement, as did a policeman and a Secret Service agent. The president, we've seen the picture. I think this might be live from the White House, what I hear in my ear. Let's go to the White House. I'm told that we're not ready to go yet. Well, the president was hustled into the limousine, and it was later revealed that he, too, was wounded on the left side of his body. Chest, condition stable, conscious.
And in good enough conditions that he was able to walk into George Washington Hospital.
Yes. Okay, that is briefly what happened, and that is what we are reacting to. As we reported earlier, the New York Stock Exchange, for obvious reasons, was shut down. Vice President George Bush, who was en route to Texas to deliver a speech, his aircraft turned around in midair and got back to Washington as soon as possible. We're told that there's a helicopter hovering over George Washington University Hospital, where the president is, and we have two correspondents there. Berkowitz, Brady, Berkowitz and Barrett, and they'll be bringing us up to date on the latest they learned there. And here's a note that's being scrawled out. This is from the White House. White House is making a decision whether or not to operate to remove the bullet from the president. Nancy Reagan, as we reported, is with the president.
And Vice President Bush will be back in Washington this afternoon.
Okay, so
he's on his way back from Texas, as you reported.
They're making a decision now whether or not to operate to remove the bullet from President Reagan's left side. As we said earlier, as Bob Berkowitz first got to us on the telephone, one of Jim Brady's colleagues, another press spokesman from the press office, said, quote, "It doesn't look good." We're still awaiting an update on Jim Brady's condition. By the way, Dan, we were just talking with Jim Brady Thursday night at the Correspondents' Dinner here in Washington. That is the latest. The president, again, is in stable condition. He walked into the hospital. It was discovered that he, too, had been wounded on the left side of the chest. The Secret Service agent injured is identified as Timothy J. McCarthy. The Secret Service also says that the would-be assailant used a .38 caliber pistol, and the Secret Service confirms the name of the suspect as that of John W. Hinckley, Jr., said to be 22 years old, from Evergreen, Colorado. I know we have people checking to find out what is the latest on his status and what have you, and as soon as we find out, we'll pass it on to you. All of this happened about 72 minutes ago, Dan.
Just about an hour and a quarter ago, yes.
And that's the situation. The President and First Lady are at George Washington University Hospital, and First Lady Nancy Reagan is there, and this is the tape as it happened about 72 minutes ago outside the Washington Hilton Hotel. As you were commenting earlier, Dan, the Secret Service agents are trained to not look at the president, but to watch the eyes of people watching him and to look for jerky movements or anything that looks suspicious.
That's right, and they're looking at the crowd, and of course, as you noted, where they did not look was among the news media people, the camera crews that were taking pictures of the president, and John Hinckley Jr. of Evergreen, Colorado, had apparently infiltrated the little cluster of people taking pictures of the president, which of course is a vulnerable spot, but I'm sure will not be vulnerable much longer.
Dan, excuse me, we're going to go live to GW Hospital and correspondent Bob Berkowitz. Bob?
Spokesman Larry Speaks, White House spokesman Larry Speaks, just emerged a few minutes ago from George Washington Hospital to say that the president's condition is now stable. The president is conscious. The president is speaking. But spokesman Larry Speaks would not say whether or not the president would need surgery, nor what the prognosis is of his condition. Beyond that, we know very little in the fact that they're setting up a press center here or near George Washington Medical Center. That's the news from George Washington Medical Center. Just to repeat, the president's condition is stable. He is conscious. He is speaking. But White House spokesman Larry Speaks would not say whether or not the president needed surgery nor what the prognosis is of his condition. I don't know what that noise was. It obviously was a shooting type noise or perhaps a backfire of a car. I don't know what it was, but obviously you heard it as well as I did. We'll try to find out exactly what that was. Back to the Bureau.
Okay, Bob Berkowitz, we'll get back to you on that. Also at George Washington University Hospital are Secretary of State Alexander Haig, Treasury Secretary Donald Reagan, Attorney General William French Smith. Of course, we said earlier, First Lady Nancy Reagan rushed to the hospital. She was not with the president at the time when the shooting incident occurred. White House Chief of Staff James Baker, as we said, reported that the president walked into the hospital. Things are fluid right now here in the Capitol, and we're looking at an enlarged picture now. This is the same videotape we've run before that we've shown you. This time it's been enlarged. And that's the picture, Dan.
Well, I suppose that picture will be one of the pictures of the year, which will be seen 1,000 times in the next couple of years. And I'm sure it will also be studied for whatever indication it can give as to what happened. There is information that is still to come and which we do not have for you. How many shots were fired? How it was that John Hinckley Jr. of Evergreen managed to be in a place where usually you have to have a Secret Service White House pass to be present. I think that there'll be a lot of procedures that will be tightened up as a result of this, but it never seems to be quite enough to tighten up procedures. There's always that possibility. As long as we have a system in this country which no one will depart from, where the president will mingle with people, will make himself available, there's always a possibility of that just one.
That's so true, Dan. We have to go through rigors to get properly credentialed, as they say in this town, and certainly things would have to be changed if indeed that did happen. We are standing by to... are we going to go to the White House? Okay, we're standing by to go live to the White House. Well, this will be not going to the White House, but we're told that we're going to have a picture of First Lady Nancy Reagan as she entered the hospital.
Nancy, get the shot. Get the shot, Doc. Get the shot.
That looks like the injured Secret Service agent who was identified earlier as being from Chicago, Ken McCarthy. Okay, we're standing by for further word. Dan, have you anything? Our CNN Washington, let's go live to the White House. Not live, but taped. This was taped earlier.
In the left side this afternoon as he left the hotel. His condition is stable. A decision is now being made whether or not to operate to remove the bullet. The White House and the Vice President are in communication, and the Vice President is now en route to Washington. He is expected to arrive in the city this afternoon. Mrs. Reagan is currently with the President at the hospital. For your background, we anticipate that additional press statements will be forthcoming from the hospital site.
Okay, that was David Gargan, the Assistant Staff Director of the White House. And right now there's a conversation here with Daniel Shore and Stuart Lurie, our CNN Washington managing editor. We are getting the latest information from all reliable sources. Stu, Dan?
Well, Stuart has been on, I don't know if I can get Stuart into the picture, but Stuart has been doing a journeyman's job of getting on the phone and getting some original information. He's been in touch with George Washington Hospital. And there, the chief of surgery, who happened to have emergency room duty today, is Dr. Tsangaris, Dr. Newt Tsangaris, as he's called, who was a famous surgeon. I know he's famous because he operated on me last month. was the one who admitted the president, formally admitted him to the hospital. The one who will perform surgery on the president, if, as, and when surgery is performed on the president, is Dr. Benjamin Aaron, who is a thoracic surgeon. And as you reported earlier, the decision as to when the operation will take place to remove the bullet which is lodged in the left chest of the president, that decision has not yet been made. Stuart, I can't read all your notes. You want to add something?
Yes, Dr. Joe Giordano is also a part of the team, Dan. He is the chief of vascular surgery at the hospital. I have been told that the scene in the emergency room is utter confusion at the present time. There is one report that the president is already on his way to surgery, but I have not been able to confirm that, and of course that does conflict just a little bit with the official information that we just got from the White House. It is fortuitous that Dr. Tsangaris himself did have emergency room duty this week, so that they did have the best there was available when the president came in.
If he needs any endorsements, I must say, of all the many weird coincidences, the fact that this is my first formal day back at the office today after an operation of my own performed by the same Dr. Tsangaris. If the president wants to be reassured, he's a hell of a good surgeon.
Gentlemen, as you were just relaying that information, by the way, as you see us moving around up here, we're listening to one another. It's just that we're all busy getting more details for you. This report says that former President Ford is in Tokyo. He's on a trip that he began earlier this month, and CNN has talked with his press spokesman, Bob Barrett, in Tokyo. Let's get back to that in a moment. David Gargan, the assistant staff director, this is the summary from Mark Walton. The decision is being made whether to operate on the president. That was the statement we just repeated to you. And we also have told you who is at the White House: First Lady Nancy Reagan, the Secretaries of Treasury, State, Defense, Attorney General William French Smith, and other close staff aides. Vice President Bush still in the air en route back from Texas. His plane turned around midair once he learned of what happened. No decision has been made to make Bush acting president because the president, of course, still is conscious.
And that, in fact, well, the question under the 25th Amendment to the Constitution, well, under the 25th Amendment, in this case, we do not have a question of incapacitation in the sense that the president would not be available to make that decision. He is speaking, he is conscious, and he's fully able to make these decisions. Long before we reach the point where a decision would have to be made about an acting vice president, what there obviously would be a delegation of certain duties to Vice President Bush. I think it would be premature to speak of the president as incapacitated.
Yes, I'm certain that was one of the questions raised by one of the reporters there in the briefing room. As we were saying, former Vice President Gerald Ford, whom, as you indicated in the rundown and the quick research, that an attempt or two was made on his life. Mr. Ford's in Tokyo. He's trying to get as much information as he can. Initially, he says he's shocked and he regrets this greatly. Mr. Ford may have something to say later in the morning, their time. If you were in Tokyo or anywhere else outside this country, it would be rather difficult. You can imagine trying to call back here to Washington and get information on the latest.
I think, Benny, we should express our regrets, or at least explain to our audience there's been a certain amount of unavoidable duplication of information.
Yes.
As you speak, I'm handed something, Stu Lurie has learned something and comes in. We would rather that you hear what we learn twice than not hear it at all, so that if there does seem to be duplication of names. Also, there's been a certain amount of lag in the White House in providing the information, so that sometimes we get information directly before the White House has confirmed it. We then give the White House confirmation of it. It still remains to be explained why it was possible for as much as 20 to 25 minutes for the White House to let us continue saying on official authority that the president had not been touched or hit, when in fact he had been hit. I don't know why that long delay.
Okay, correspondent Mark Walton is at the White House, but right now, Mark, we were looking at the picture that we've seen so many times outside the Washington Hilton Hotel. Mark, what is the latest where you are?
Bernie, as you summarized just a couple of minutes ago, there was a briefing here by one of the chief staff directors, a man by the name of David Gergen, who confirmed, of course, that the president had been hit in the left side and said that a decision is being made at this moment as to whether or not to operate on the president. We have learned that Vice President George Bush was in Texas at the time of the shooting. He's now on the way back here to the White House. Will probably arrive here sometime in the next couple of hours, although there is no intention to make him an acting president at the moment. The president, President Reagan, of course, is still conscious. His condition listed as stable. Here at the White House, and having arrived in the last hour or so, the Secretary of State Haig, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Defense Weinberger, and the Attorney General, with the president at the hospital, his wife Nancy, and of course his closest aides. Bernie, that's what we know for now.
Dan?
Yes, I don't know whether we're in a position to talk to Mark.
Can Mark hear us? Yes, we can talk to Mark Walker.
Mark, I know it's early and that most of the attention right now is focused on getting some of these simple details out of who's where and the condition of everybody. But has anybody yet given any thought to the question, or has anybody asked White House spokesman this question of to what extent will duties be now delegated to Vice President Bush, and what the position is of the Vice President when he returns to Washington, as he apparently will do in the next few minutes?
Dan, the question was asked, what does Bush's return mean? Will he become, in essence, acting president? The problem is, of course, that the president's chief spokesman, Jim Brady, was among those wounded, and his deputy spokesman, Larry Speaks, is among those over at the hospital, along with James Baker and Edwin Meese, all of the president's top aides. So it is not clear whether those decisions are being discussed here by the secretaries, the cabinet secretaries, whom I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, or by those chief aides over at the hospital. The question has to be discussed, I guess, on both sides. So for right now, the right people are probably not here in the White House to answer those questions. They're probably over at the hospital.
With Secretary of State Haig, who is the first and most senior cabinet officer, meeting with the president of the hospital, I would suggest the chance that they might be even discussing that in the president's hospital room at this moment.
Dan, we have been told that the substantive announcements of all sorts will be coming from the hospital location over the next couple of hours. And of course, the decision as to whether to operate on the president and whether Mr. Reagan might have to be put under some kind of anesthesia for the time being, I assume that the decision about what Mr. Bush's status would be would have some relationship to that.
That's a very interesting point you make, because we were told earlier about the decision about when to operate for the removal of the bullet still lodged in the president's left chest. That decision has not yet been made, and I think it is quite likely that the decision will not be made until Vice President Bush is here, so that the Vice President will at least be present during the time that the President is under anesthesia.
Well, correspondent Bob Berkowitz is over at the hospital, and let's switch live to him again, and perhaps he can clear up that noise we heard in the midst of his report. Bob?
Bernie, we still don't know exactly what that noise was. Let me just recap, if I may, what White House spokesman Larry Speaks told us about 15 minutes ago. The president's condition is described by Speaks as stable. He is speaking. Again, according to White House spokesman Larry Speaks, the president is conscious. We do not know whether or not the president will be operated on or will not be operated on, and they would not give us a prognosis of what his condition is or will be. As far as James Brady, the White House chief press secretary, again, we do not know what his condition was. Brady was shot very seriously outside of the president's limousine at the Hilton Hotel earlier this afternoon. He was taken here to George Washington Medical Center, and we don't know what his condition is presently. It looked very bad, though, and is bleeding profusely on the left side of his head. Of course, as we've said many times, the president was shot on the left side of his body, and as we've said, repeating once again, according to White House spokesman Larry Speaks, the president's condition is described as stable. He is conscious, he is speaking, but we don't know whether or not they're going to operate on him. Meanwhile, Mrs. Reagan is here. She came earlier, as did White House Counselor Edwin Meese. The president's chief of staff, James Baker, is here as well. Vice President Bush cut short his trip to Texas and is on his way back to Washington. Should be back sometime this afternoon. Gentlemen?
Bob, if you hear me, had you heard, as we heard here, that they were doing a CAT scan on Jim Brady and that he was not moving at the time, that he appeared to be unconscious. Had you heard that?
Absolutely. We have heard absolutely nothing about Brady's condition. We asked about Brady's condition to his assistant, Larry Speaks, and Speaks would not comment on Jim's condition.
And as you speak, we are showing a picture of Jim Brady as he falls to the ground, somebody holding a compress to his head. The head has obviously sustained a bullet wound during that series of bullets that were fired at the president and the aides and Secret Service and police who were clustered around him. It is quite clear that he is quite seriously injured.
Yes, indeed he is.
Bob, what's the next time we can expect something from the White House press staff that is there? A staff that's under great strain at the moment.
Yes, Larry Speaks, White House press spokesman, said that they would be giving us updates every half hour. If indeed they hold to that schedule, we should be getting one within the next 5 or 10 minutes. We will call you immediately as soon as we get word from the White House on any news that we have, gentlemen.
Thank you, Bob Berkowitz at the White House. It would seem, Dan, I was just thinking as Bob was reporting to us the latest from there are some members of the cabinet who are back in the White House, but things are at a halt right now.
My understanding is that most of the top members of the cabinet, whose names you gave earlier, the Secretary said Haig, Attorney General Smith, and others had gone to the hospital and were with the president.
Yes. Okay, thank you for that correction. I thought I understood when you were asking Mark Walton about the question of the vice president, and they were saying that, you know, they'd have to wait until he comes back. But things right now are standing still until we can find out what's going to happen with the goal.
Things may be standing still as far as we are concerned as we wait for spokesmen to get their act together and come out and provide information. I would doubt that things are standing still very much in the U.S. government. There you see John W. Hinckley, Jr. of Evergreen, Colorado, who has been identified as the person who fired the shots of the president and those around him. This is a picture of him. The shots were said to have been fired from a .22 caliber pistol. It was said that he had fired the shots from the area where the camera crew was, the ABC camera crew, which travels with the president today, and was taking pictures of him as he was leaving, having made a speech to the AFL-CIO construction trades.
Yeah, and that was ABC's cameraman Hank Brown, who was interviewed there at the hotel a short while ago.
We know nothing yet about who John W. Hinckley Jr. is, and I imagine that right now there are reporters and others descending on Evergreen, Colorado, to learn about him.
CBS News, I'm told, is reporting that President Reagan has gone into surgery, that according to CBS News.
Which would be for the removal, simply for the removal of the bullet now lodged in his left chest, if there are no other complications.
And ABC News reports that Press Secretary James Brady's condition is very critical.
Which would indicate why he appeared to be not moving or unconscious.
And
the fact that they have not yet given any indication of any attempted surgery on Jim Brady would also speak for a fairly poor prognosis.
Is that the white piece of paper, Donna?
Yeah.
Okay. That we've passed on to you about Jim Brady's condition being very critical.
Jim Brady, you know, wasn't supposed to get that job. They've been looking around for somebody to be press secretary, and only after they couldn't agree on somebody else, and after some rather slighting remarks have been made about Jim is not cutting quite the figure they wanted, they offered him a job, and loyally he took it without a complaint. And so there he was on hand today doing his duty.
Jim has a son, by the way. He's married. He has a son. We're going to show you just what it looks like outside George Washington University Hospital. The hospital sits off Washington Circle. This is an old neighborhood of mine, Dan. I live just 2 blocks up the street, just south of this picture, near the State Department.
I spent a recent week in this hospital, so I guess I'm an alumnus of this also. That's right. It's a teaching hospital. It's connected with, obviously, as suggested, with George Washington University Medical School, one of the 3 great teaching hospitals in the Washington area, the others being Georgetown and the Washington Hospital Center. It happens to be the one which is closest to the Washington Hilton Hotel where President Reagan spoke. It is only about a mile and a half away, and undoubtedly therefore the reason why the President and Jim Brady were rushed here.
And on the left side of your picture, you can see a clearing which suggests that you're looking down the street. You're actually looking down Pennsylvania Avenue, and the White House is just about 8 or 9 blocks away if you were to continue looking down that street.
That's right. And as you can see, that the security at the hospital itself must be quite massive now. It would be very difficult for anybody to come very close to the hospital. We are looking, actually, I think that's on 23rd Street, because it looks like the main entrance to the hospital.
Oh, that's right off Washington Circle there.
But in any event, we hope that the President's stay in the hospital will be short.
We are told, Dan, that Pete Thiele, Vice President Bush's press secretary, says that the Vice President will arrive back at Andrews Air Force Base a little before 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And Peter Thiele says he assumes that Mr. Bush will go directly to see President Reagan.
That means, however, that contrary to my speculation of a few minutes ago, they did not wait for Vice President Bush to land before taking the President into surgery, if indeed he has gone up to the operating room.
Mm-hmm. We still don't. This is the scene again, as taped earlier, as it was happening. James Brady on the ground. The man in the center of that frenzied huddle is the alleged assailant. There's a Secret Service agent on the ground.
That's Jim Brady in better times.
And we do know that he sustained a wound on the left side of his head, because that was the side that was laying flush with the sidewalk. And from a spokesman at the Washington Hospital Center, the police officer wounded now is listed in serious condition. It had been critical, but now his condition is said to be critical, rather serious.
We still don't know his name, do we?
We still do not. The situation with that officer is that the bullet entered the back of the left shoulder. It now is lodged in his neck. He is being stabilized in the shock trauma center of the hospital. His name has not been released pending notification of family. And as we look at the picture again outside the hospital, we pass on to you that ABC News is reporting the President has been in surgery for some time. The network does not know how long. This is the picture slowed down for you to get a closer look at it.
The armor-plated presidential limousine flying the American flag. This is this moment after the shots were fired. Reacting as though by reflex, the Secret Service people do as they try to do in Dallas and elsewhere. They first see to the protection of the President, and they push him undercover into the armor-plated limousine, not knowing how many people are going to fire how many shots.
Dan, we're being told that the state police of Colorado and Secret Service agents already have arrived at the alleged assailant's home in Evergreen, Colorado. The area is described by the state police as an affluent one. State officials say after a quick check of their police files, they have nothing in their records on John Hinckley Jr. There's a Y missing on this. On John Hinckley, nor could they provide any details of how he lived or what he was doing in Evergreen, Colorado.
And meanwhile, we are still showing or have just still been showing once again, still another version of the videotape that was being made outside the hotel.
Mark Walton right now. No, until we're going now to Bob Berkowitz outside George Washington University Hospital.
Bernie, no new news to update you on. The last report we had was well over a half an hour ago by White House spokesman Larry Speaks. The president's condition is being described as stable, that he is conscious, that he is talking, and the report is that he was shot on the left side of his chest, and note that he was shot only once. As far as White House spokesman James Brady's condition is concerned, we do not have a report on that. They would not give us any information on that. Brady was shot on the left side of his head, and he was bleeding profusely just outside the Hilton Hotel. I couldn't help it over here. I used to live in Denver, and Evergreen, Colorado indeed is an affluent city just about 30 miles west of Denver. Sure.
Let's go switch to the White House now, where correspondent Mark Walton is standing by. Mark?
In just a minute or two, Deputy Press Secretary Larry Speaks, who has been at the hospital, is coming out. Here he comes now to make a statement.
Here he comes.
This is, of course, Jim Brady's deputy.
Mainly, I wanted to come here to let you know that I will be present here throughout. Len Knopfsiger's at the hospital. He will be making statements from there. We will have the same information here. I can only say what we said earlier, that the president has a gunshot wound in the left side of the chest. He is in stable condition. Jim Brady has been shot. It is a head wound. We have no information on his condition. That's the extent.
President in surgery.
I can't say, Leslie.
We have gotten confirmed reports, so have other network news, so have the wires. Can't you help us with that, Larry?
As soon as we can confirm it, we will. And
His brother's been called by the White House and has been told that the president is in surgery right now, that he's already had blood transfusions. Is your information going to be that far behind what we're getting from other sources?
No, Leslie, we will do our very best to keep it up. As you know, earlier when I was out here, our initial reports was that the president was not hit. That's what we run into when we try to give information when we aren't 100% sure or we don't have it from the source. We do have somebody there with the president. I will be here, and I just want to let you know I'll come down every 15 or 20 or 30 minutes just to let you know exactly what we know, and we'll also let you know when we don't have any further information.
The extent of what you know, what you just said now, is that the extent of what you know?
That's the extent of what I can say at this time.
Surgery and come back.
With a phone call or something?
I will. Sure. No.
Do you have any idea, there are reports that it punctured the lung?
We can't confirm that yet. We've talked to the doctors, but, you know, we cannot confirm that yet.
Larry, can you confirm reports that Jim is in surgery now?
Yes.
What process does the United States government go through with foreign governments when something like this occurs?
Jerry, there is a notification process, and I think the State Department has moved on that.
The U.S. military been placed on any higher readiness?
Not that I'm aware of. There were some questions about the Vice President. I understand he was in Texas today. He is returning. He is expected to arrive at Andrews around 8 o'clock this evening, according to the information I have now. He has been informed. He is in communication.
Would he assume emergency powers? Would he assume?
Can
there be a division of labor of any
kind? Not that I'm aware of. We just haven't crossed those bridges yet.
What's the nature of the notification that the State Department is making to foreign governments?
I'm sure it's a notification to indicate that the, you know, that the president is in stable condition.
And who's running the government right now?
If the president goes into surgery and goes under anesthesia, Vice President Bush become the acting president at that moment, or under what circumstances does he?
I cannot answer that question, which is technical and legal.
What about the crisis management team? Does that come into effect?
Larry, what is the consideration in not keeping us more up to date on the president's condition? We know he's in surgery, and no one seems to be able to come out and confirm it. Why the time lag?
Leslie, I would assure you there's no reason except we want to be completely sure of our facts.
What sources are confirming it?
Well, I'm sorry, I cannot do it from here at this time.
What can you tell us about the gunman who's in custody?
Absolutely nothing. That would have to come from the Secret Service or the police.
Larry, who will be determining the status of the president, whether the vice president should in fact become the acting president?
Pardon?
Who will be determining the status of the president?
I don't know the details on that. I'll let you know shortly.
So will you announce any statement about
find out who?
Okay, that is the latest from the White House press lobby. And before we go
Such
away
as
from
it is.
this, yeah, that's the latest, and it's confusing and it's frustrating, but that's the way it is. He's at the White House, and he apparently is learning secondhand what is going on. But that is just the state of affairs right now.
Well, the state of affairs. This is a White House which came in to do a zero-defect job and talks about crisis management.
Yes.
And apparently is not in a position to get a telephone call through to the hospital and tell us what news agencies are telling us.
Dan, let me interrupt you, and let's go back to the White House and Secretary Alexander Haig.
Touch with the Vice President, who is returning to Washington. We have in the Situation Room all of the officials of the Cabinet who should be here and ready at this time. We have informed our friends abroad of the situation, the President's condition as we know it, stable, now undergoing surgery, and there are absolutely no alert measures that are necessary at this time or contemplated. Now, if you have some questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Crisis management, is that put into effect when you arrived?
Crisis management is in effect.
Who is making the decisions for the government right now? Who's making the decisions?
Constitutionally, gentlemen, you have the President, the Vice President, and the Secretary of State in that order. And should the President decide he wants to transfer the helm to the Vice President, he will do so.
Who makes that decision?
As of now, I am in control here in the White House, pending return of the Vice President, and I'm in close touch with him. If something came up, I would check with him, of course.
What are the extent of the President's injuries?
Well, as best we know, he's had one round into his body, in the left side, into the left lung, and there is a surgery underway to remove the round now. When the President entered surgery, he was conscious. All his signs were stable, and the situation is very clear.
Why did you get surgery? By phone? Before surgery?
No, I did not. Nor was it necessary. I was in close touch with both Mr. Meese and Mr. Baker throughout, and have been from the early moments.
Approximately when did you arrive at the White House?
Very few moments after the incident. Very few moments after the incident.
And do you know what is the condition, Mr. Brady?
We understand that I just saw on television what you saw, and it sounds serious.
What's the reaction of the Soviets in this? What is any reaction?
I don't anticipate any reaction. I think you've gotten all that you need for the moment, and thank you.
Will you remain in charge here until the Vice President?
We'll stay right where we are until the situation clarifies.
When is the Vice President expected surgery, sir? When is the Vice President expected here?
Later this afternoon. He'll be here shortly.
When the operation began, sir, on the President, about what time?
Was I here? Yes, I was here.
What time? What time the operation began? What time was the operation?
I don't know. Just it was shortly after that announcement that you heard on the radio, on television.
Vice President be back, sir?
Early evening. Well, I'm not going to make it a habit of saying where. He'll be back.
Come back and talk to us soon?
Thank you. If it's necessary, of course.
Any additional measures being taken? Was there a conspiracy, or was this an act?
There are no indications of anything like that now, and we are not going to say a word on that subject until the situation clarifies, of course.
From what you know of the President's condition, that the Vice President will have to, for a period of time, take the role of acting President?
That's a fundamentally premature question, and I couldn't answer it. Thank you very much.
Is he under anesthesia now?
A very shaken Alexander Haig has just announced that for now he is in charge, and many people have wondered about the United States Constitution, and those words on that parchment are not there for nothing.
Well, I am not sure yet whether what the Secretary of State said is precisely in accordance with the Constitution.
No, it's not.
There is, in fact, a line of succession, but that line of succession is triggered only by the total incapacity of the President or a decision of the President. If the President has not yet decided that to pass on the presidency for the time being, then he hasn't passed it on. If he is speaking, if he is conscious, then nobody can take it away from him. it may be premature at a time like this to criticize the words of Secretary Haig, but they are at least open to constitutional question when Haig says that for the time being, I am in charge here. His willingness to be in charge has been noted before, and the alacrity with which he fills vacuums has been noted before. But let's leave those arguments, and I'm sure there will be those arguments for the time when they have to be argued out, and pick out of what we heard here a couple more facts than we had before.
Information.
For one thing, Secretary Haig said, which no one else had said, that the wound was not simply in the left side or the left chest, but affected the left lung.
Yes.
That makes it sound somewhat more serious than it sounded before. Also, one of the questions to Larry Speaks suggested that the president was not only undergoing surgery, but had blood transfusions. I don't know whether information put in the form of a question is information to be accepted, but still I just want to point out that there are little suggestions, other things that appear to be coming out. What also appears to be true is that the position of James Brady, the president's press secretary, who has gone into surgery, appears to be quite grave.
And ironically, of course, the crisis management team is operating. Our White House correspondent Bob Berkowitz is where the president is, only he's outside. Bob is outside George Washington University Hospital, where he has with him an eyewitness, I'm told. Bob?
Gentlemen, this is Willis King, who is inside the emergency room here at George Washington Hospital as the president was taken in. Mr. King, can you describe what you saw, sir?
Well, it happened, he came in about 2:15. The president walked in on his own will, but one of the Secret Service was holding him. The press secretary came in, and then they rolled another guy in. The press secretary had a bandage on the one, I don't know which side of his head it was on, but the Secret Service came in and told everybody, get out, get out. And then nobody knew what was going on. Then he all get the hell out, and everybody
let me see if I understand this now. President Reagan was taken in. He was walking, but it was being helped by some aides or Secret Service agents?
I think it was Secret Service. He walked on, mostly on his own power.
Was he talking?
Well, he was nodding his head. Somebody was saying something to him, and he was nodding his head.
Did he have an expression of pain on his face?
Yeah, he did.
But he was definitely walking?
Yeah.
And James Brady was wheeled in on a stretcher?
He was laying face down on the stretcher with his head, had his head bandaged up, and you could see very little of the meat on the side of his head.
All right, this is Willis King, who is an eyewitness to the president being brought in across the street at George Washington Hospital. I'm Bob Berkowitz. Back to the Washington Bureau. Gentlemen?
President, Vice President, Secretary.
Yes. Okay, while Bob Berkowitz was talking to a gentleman who was in the emergency room under times of stress, people who have to do things react with a sound of authority and a sense of urgency. And that's not the first time when a president has been shot that upon entering the emergency room, the Secret Service agents take charge to make certain that the chief executive is treated and people are given the attention they need in an emergency situation. Mark Walton is at the White House. Mark?
If Dan Shore is there with you, I believe he is. Dan, did you note, as I did, the shaky condition of Secretary of State Haig? Now, you've been through a lot with that gentleman, and so have I, in lengthy hearings. He was pretty shook up. That was my observation.
Yes,
kind of surprised me.
Mark, it was very clear to see that Secretary Haig was under some tension, and the reasons for his tension were quite clear and obvious. It was very unfortunate that he should be put in the position of being the spokesman at the White House in the very week following a controversy about whether or not he had too much or too little influence in the White House. He clearly was self-conscious about that. We should mention that standing next to him, under even more tension, if possible, than Secretary Haig himself, was Richard V. Allen, who was the National Security Assistant to President Carter, and who has also been now and then in confrontation with Secretary Haig. What unfortunate is just at the time when you would hope that the entire executive branch could pull together, dealing with a problem of this sort at hand, that overshadowing it is a background of some backbiting that's been going on in the past couple of weeks, which inevitably leaves its effect at a time like this. I don't know what other reasons Secretary Haig had for attention, but simply to have to walk into the White House and stand up at the White House briefing room and talk about the succession from the presidency to the vice president, who is now on a plane somewhere, to Secretary Haig, who just happens to be on hand, must be frightfully embarrassing after all that has happened in the past few weeks.
I would think so, and also I think we had a taste of what mixed messages are like here, or at least the fact that the chain of command, while it is written on paper, and the chain of information, while it should be very succinct and straightforward at a time like this, often gets shaken up pretty badly. We saw in just a period of a couple of minutes the Deputy Press Secretary, Larry Speake, saying he did not know the condition of the president, allowing for the first time that James Brady was in surgery, but not coming out and saying whether the president was, and then Haig coming out and confirming immediately that the president was in surgery. This is could, of course, be due to a lack of information on Speake's part. By the same token, it's very possible that Speake has been told not to relay the information about surgery, so that could be happening as well.
I'm just reminded, gentlemen, that, and this is the point we've been making in this discussion, that these are mortals involved in a crisis right now, and we're certainly seeing things as they are unstuck.
Well, you're very charitable, Bernie, and these are indeed mortals. These are also officials who bear responsibility. Anybody who remembers press spokesmen at other times, like to go back to some sad times, like Frank Mankiewicz standing on top of a car after Robert Kennedy was assassinated in Los Angeles in 1976, and listening to Mankiewicz standing there for half hours calmly in spite of what he was feeling, giving all the information that he could, or in the case of President Kennedy, putting out the information as fast as one could. It remains to be explained what's wrong with the structure of press relations at the White House, that if the press secretary happens to be hit, that it is not possible at a time when the president is on the operating table for the person who speaks for the White House, Larry Speake, to not be able to say that he knows, although one moment later Secretary Haig comes out and says it is so.
We'll pick up on that point in a moment. We're going to show you pictures of the alleged gunman. The suspect is identified as John W. Hinckley, Jr., Evergreen, Colorado. And as correspondent Bob Berkowitz said, Sissy Baker here on our assignment desk is handing us more information now. Evergreen is not too far from Denver, as you can see, and Bob Berkowitz, who's lived in Denver, tells us about the neighborhood. We're told that the suspect was not in the U.S. Secret Service files. He reportedly used a .22 caliber long revolver. And the word on Mr. Hinckley's not being in the Secret Service files comes to us from Secret Service headquarters, where correspondent Dave Browdy is standing by to bring us information. Dan, another word on the District of Columbia police officer. He's in serious condition, shot in the back of the shoulder, the bullet lodged in his neck. He's being stabilized in the trauma unit. According to radio or television station WJLA here in Washington, the last name of that District of Columbia police officer is Delahunty. He's 45 years old, 17 years on the D.C. police force. His condition still serious, and the Secret Service agent who sustained a chest wound is listed as 31-year-old Timothy McCarthy from Chicago, and of course the other person, two other people, White House Press Secretary James Brady, and of course the President. I hope that we are able to get word when the President is out of surgery.
Yes.
This is a slow motion picture we're looking at again, Dan.
That's right. This is the President, slow motion, and something more than slow motion is happening to this picture. But as he left the Washington Hilton Hotel, where he just concluded an address to the Construction Trades Division of the AFL-CIO, a speech in which he had gone over and then asserted very confidently his own confidence in his own economic program, and extended a word of support for the independent trade unions in Poland. And having come out and been greeting the crowd, shots were heard. The President immediately was pushed by the Secret Service into his car, while off to the side, as we will perhaps see in other pictures, Jim Brady, his press secretary, felled with a shot to the head Also, you can see only the feet of a Secret Service man also shot. A District of Columbia policeman also shot.
And that photographer to the right of the door, Dad, he was taking a picture there.
And by this time, the suspected assailant, John Brinkley, Jr., 22 years old, wielding a .22 caliber long revolver, has been seized by the Secret Service and the police. And they have pushed him off to the side of the hotel building. Half to hold him in custody and half perhaps to protect him for trial.
Just minutes after the shooting incident, this is Vice President George Bush, the entourage, the Bush entourage, boarding a plane in Dallas. And we're told that he will be getting back to Washington between 6:30 and 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, Dan, and we are told that Andrews Air Force Base will be closed. We will not be allowed out there to cover that arrival. As I was saying, just moments following the shooting
I would bet also that he comes in from there by helicopter.
Absolutely. Moments after the president was shot at and hit, along with 3 other people, the Federal Bureau of Investigation arrived, and their assistant agent in charge of the FBI's Washington field office, Thomas Baker, talked with CNN.
Once there is an attempt on the president's life or an actual assassination, it's FBI jurisdiction, okay? We have FBI agents here who are interviewing all the witnesses at this time. We are processing all the evidence. We have our mobile crime lab here from the FBI laboratory, and they are taking the weapon is in our possession now, as well as the suspect's clothing. And this is being done directly by the FBI mobile crime laboratory from our headquarters.
Can you tell us what kind of gun it was?
It's a pistol. At this time, I'm not a forensics expert. I don't know what kind of gun, but the gun, we have taken the gun and all the other physical evidence, and all the actual witnesses to the shooting inside are being interviewed right now by FBI agents.
What about the suspect himself?
The suspect himself at this moment is in police headquarters in a secure office there, and he is being interviewed by FBI agents, and he will be placed under arrest by FBI agents for the attempted assassination.
Do you notice? Okay, our correspondent Joe Pennington has sent back word from the District of Police headquarters that the local policeman involved in the shooting was Thomas Delahanty. He's 45 years old. Condition is critical. Now let's go back to that very important first briefing from Secretary of State, a very shaken Secretary of State Alexander Haig at the White House, which you saw just a few moments ago. I'm told it's coming. We are bringing that tape. This can give you an indication of the lay of the land here. The one at the top, the red dot, the Washington Hilton, and just below that, George Washington Hospital. And you recall we were looking at the picture, and the White House is not too far away. The White House is just southeast of Washington Hospital. And there seems to be some distance between the Hilton Hotel and the Washington GW Hospital, but there really isn't when you have a presidential motorcade. Of course, they have the right-of-way at all times when they're moving about. We are going to bring to you once more Secretary of State Alexander Haig in the press lobby.
If I get the sequence of events right, and I'm never quite sure whether some of the information we're getting isn't incorrect, but apparently the Secretary had been at the hospital and had seen the president, and from there went to the White House, where he then appeared to make the first authorized statement on behalf of the administration.
Let's listen to it once more.
Matters associated with today's tragedy. First, as you know, we're in close touch with the Vice President, who is returning to Washington. We have in the Situation Room all of the officials of the cabinet who should be here and ready at this time. We have informed our friends abroad of the situation, the president's condition as we know it, stable, now undergoing surgery, and there are absolutely no alert measures that are necessary at this time or contemplated. Now, if you have some questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Crisis management, that's what you put into effect when you arrived?
Crisis management is in effect.
Who is making the decisions for the government right now? Who's making the decisions?
Constitutionally, gentlemen, you have the president, the vice president, and the secretary of state in that order. And should the president decide he wants to transfer the helm to the vice president, he will do so.
Who makes that decision?
As of now, I am in control here in the White House, pending return of the vice president, and I'm in close touch with him. If something came up, I would check with him, of course.
What are the extent of the president's injuries?
Well, as best we know, he's had one round into his body, in the left side, into the left lung, and there is a surgery underway to remove the round now. When the president entered surgery, he was conscious. All his signs were stable, and the situation is very clear.
Why did they convert surgery? By phone? Before surgery?
No, I did not, nor was it necessary. I was in close touch with both Mr. Meese and Mr. Baker throughout, and have been from the early moments.
Approximately when did you arrive at the White House?
Very few moments after the incident. Very few moments after the incident.
And do you know what is the condition, Mr. Brady?
We understand that I just saw on television what you saw, and it sounds serious.
What's the reaction of the Soviets in this? What is the reaction?
I don't anticipate any reaction. I think you've gotten all that you need for the moment, and thank you.
Will you remain in charge here until the vice president?
We'll stay right where we are until the situation clarifies.
When is the vice president expected
surgery, sir?
When is the vice president expected here?
Later this afternoon. You'll be here shortly.
When the operation began, sir, on the president, at what time?
Was I here? Yes, I was here.
What time?
What time the operation began? What time was the operation?
I don't know. Just it was shortly after that announcement that you heard on the radio, on television. Early evening. Well, I'm not going to make it a habit of saying where. He'll be back.
Come back and talk to us soon.
Thank you. If it's necessary, of course.
Any additional measures being taken? Was there a conspiracy, or was this an act?
There are no indications of anything like that now, and we are not going to say a word on that subject until the situation clarifies, of course.
From what you know of the president's condition, that the vice president will have to, for a period of time, take the role of acting president?
That's a fundamentally premature question, and I couldn't answer it. Thank you very much.
Is he under anesthesia now?
Well, Alexander Haig mustering up all the discipline and self-control of a former general, former NATO commander, Secretary of State, to appear in the White House press room to answer questions. We are told that in a short while from that same podium from which Secretary Haig just spoke, Larry Speaks will be bringing us further word in.
I hear that there is a press conference now in progress at the Washington University Hospital. It is not clear who's giving it, and clearly it has not been possible to get cameras into it, but Stuart Lurie, our Washington managing editor, is on the phone trying to keep in touch with that press conference. The next word we get may be from the hospital.
Dan, as we were coming back from that tape briefing, our managing editor here, Stuart Lurie, was coming to show us something. Monday, March 30th, that's today. The Washington Post with the
article on
takeout
Post that I referred to
of
earlier.
George Bush. And here's a paragraph on page A8. It was at Ronald Reagan's 70th birthday party that the president leaned over to Barbara Bush and said, quote, "I want to ask you a very personal question. Is George happy with his job? Does he feel what he's doing is worthwhile? I just want to be sure he's doing enough. If the awful should happen, George should know everything." Unquote.
Yeah, I'm glad to have the exact text of that paragraph. I alluded to it an hour ago as I talked about the irony that only today George Bush was being celebrated in the Washington Post because of his intimate and inside track connection with the president and the president's reference to the fact that he wanted Bush to know everything in case of this awful, awful thing.
This was the picture again, this tragedy that Secretary Haig referred to. At the time, apparently, according to Chief of Staff James Baker, the president did not know he had been hit. We do know from this picture, as the agents and police subdue the alleged gunman against the wall, that James Brady, the White House press secretary, was shot in the head. A policeman was felled by a bullet, as was that Secret Service agent at the top of your screen on the sidewalk. Baker reports that President Reagan walked under his own power into the hospital emergency room. He is in surgery at the moment. Alexander Haig told us in that briefing at the White House a short while ago, in which you've seen a second time on videotape, that the bullet of the round apparently is lodged in the lung. The Vice President, George Bush, is due back here in the Capitol, due to arrive at Andrews Air Force Base before 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. The police right now and the agents working quickly to get handcuffs on him. As you pointed out earlier, Dan, also working to protect this man. The agent with his submachine gun there.
It really is quite a remarkable picture that there is the suspected, the alleged perpetrator of the crime, and not 10 feet away, his victim.
Identified as John W. Hinckley, Jr. Dave Browdy at U.S. Secret Service headquarters sends word that the weapon was a long .22 caliber weapon.
There are two of it. There is, first of all, there's Jim Brady, and further on is the Secret Service officer who's been shot. And it is, unfortunately, in the age that we live in, this media age, in the age of the highly portable camera, that when a moment of this sort takes place, it is so poignant that placed before you is a moment of drama that no made-up piece of drama ever seems to be able to rival.
Well, ever since hearing the word that someone had fired at the president, I don't know how you've reacted physically, but I just get shivers and chills. The ABC network cameraman, ABC was pooled today. That's where a smaller group of correspondence cameramen travel with the president, and whatever they learn, they pass back to the larger pool of the White House press corps. Was Hank Brown, and you saw him in an interview earlier with Browdy, and he said that the man just, he squeezed the trigger and he held on to it until his gun was empty.
I don't know enough about guns to know how many shots were fired.
Okay, we're standing by to go to our White House correspondent, Bob Berkowitz, who was covering and traveling with the president at the hotel. He is now, of course, at George Washington University Hospital. In just a while, Dan, Bob Berkowitz is going to bring us up to date on the latest that's being said there. Bob, you are there.
Yes, Bernie, we are told by the public information officer for George Washington Hospital that there should be, and there will be, a press conference within about 15, 20 minutes or so. Presumably that'll give us more information on the president's condition. Beyond that, very little is happening here. The press conference, I think, will be about a block or two from the hospital, which is just across the street from where we are right now. Bernie?
Thank you very much.
Conference?
Bob Berkowitz at the White House. I'm sorry, at George Washington University Hospital. I was just checking this late word. This is information that we had passed on to you before. Dan?
There is a question now. Of course, we have heard from Secretary Haig, and we're in this in-between period where, with Vice President Bush on his way back, that speaking for the entire executive branch of the government right now is the senior member of the cabinet, Secretary Haig. And at some point, there will have to be decisions made about where we go from here. And I guess a lot of this will depend on the condition of the president, which we will know pretty soon.
Dan, as we have seen, television crews are waiting for President Reagan to emerge from the Washington Hilton Hotel after a speech. The speech carried live here before the building council of the AFL-CIO. One of the ABC cameramen, Hank Brown, was an eyewitness to the shooting.
He went back just as he got the car, about 4 to 5 shots going on. And I saw Brady going down, Secret Service agents going down, and a police officer going down. And as I saw them going down, I was going down. I turned in the direction of the sound. There was a man with a gun, a white male with blonde hair. And he was still firing, the agents were still wrestling with him. He looked 29, in his late 20s or early 30s. About 10 feet away from Reagan. About 4 to 5 shots. He was hitting agents and police officers. He was in the line of fire of Reagan.
That's Hank Brown. His correct name is Henry Brown, but of course we all know him in this town as Hank, and he was right there. We're told now that we have some tape of Vice President George Bush. This is the Vice President at the huge Dallas-Fort Worth airport. He is preparing to leave to the control tower there at Carswell Air Force Base to leave to get back to Washington. We're told that when he gets back, the airport will be closed, and he will, of course, be going directly to the hospital. The messages of concern, of course, are pouring into that hospital. We're told that former President Nixon has called First Lady Nancy Reagan and talked with her on the telephone. We don't know precisely what Mr. Nixon said to Mrs. Reagan, but one can guess that it's concern and best wishes.